Anna Sablina, the familiar voice of radio host Vologda, was once a symbol of confidence and success. But after the sudden death of the man she'd been with for over 10 years, her world fell silent, revealing a void unseen by anyone. It was in this solitude that another man entered her life. He was gentle, caring, and appeared at Anna's weakest moment. But behind that facade of concern lay instability, jealousy, and rages she didn't recognize. On the night of January 2nd, 2023, in a brightly lit Moscow apartment, that gentleness vanished in minutes. When the police broke down the door, they were confronted with a horrifying scene. Anna lay motionless with hundreds of stab wounds, and beside her was the man she had once trusted, drunk, covered in blood, and unable to explain what had just happened. What really happened in that locked room, and why were the warning signs ignored until it was too late? The story of Anna Sablina is not just a case. It's a chilling reminder of how tragedy can silently grow in the very moments we believe we are loved. Anna Sablina was born in 1988 in Vologda, Russia, into a family of educators. Her father, a doctor of history, worked at a university dedicated to regional studies, while her mother was also active in the education sector. Their home was marked by order, discipline, and high expectations for their children. From a young age, Anna stood out for her confidence on stage. She sang, acted in school productions, and frequently hosted school events. Her friends recognized her ability to captivate audiences, and this talent paved the way for her career in media. Unlike many of her peers, Anna always knew what she wanted: a career in radio. In 2006, she entered Vologda State University to study journalism. During her first year, she landed an internship at Russian Radio Vologda, where her distinct voice drew immediate attention. The station soon invited her to host live shows while continuing her studies. Around that time, she adopted her on-air pseudonym, Azovskaya, a catchy name that listeners quickly recognized. By 2011, upon graduating, Anna had become a well-known voice throughout Vologda. Many people listened to her daily, in their cars, in their offices, or at home. Her rapid rise was the result of both talent and determination. Anna's career was stable, but her life changed after she met Vasily Solovyov in 2009. He was a successful businessman from Cherepovets, running several companies, including the radio station where Anna worked. He was nearly 20 years older than her, known for his calm demeanor and high work efficiency. Their relationship began professionally but soon developed into something more personal. Vasily admired Anna's ambition and actively supported her career. He gifted her a car, arranged housing for her in Moscow on Polina Osipenko Street, and helped her find accommodation in Cherepovets and Vologda. These gifts clearly demonstrated his desire for a long-term future with her. Despite their age difference, their relationship remained strong. They kept their romance private, only sharing it with a few close friends. Friends described it as a balanced relationship, not the typical story of a wealthy man and a young woman in the media industry. Anna remained independent and continued advancing her career, never relying solely on Vasily's financial support. Their partnership lasted for over a decade. By the early 2022s, they began to think about a shared future. But in 2021, everything changed suddenly. Vasily fell seriously ill, had to be put on a ventilator, and passed away in June of that same year at the age of 51. Vasily's death was a huge shock to Anna. She became withdrawn, stopping sharing her future plans. Colleagues noticed that the confidence and energy that once defined her seemed to fade. This marked the beginning of a decline in her emotional well-being, which would later profoundly affect her life. After Vasily's death, Anna continued to work, but only what was necessary. Work no longer brought her joy, only daily responsibilities. she gradually withdrew from social life, avoiding meeting and talking with friends. Colleagues noticed she rarely smiled and evaded questions about her personal life. For Anna, this period of loneliness and instability made her increasingly vulnerable to such influences. Throughout 2022, her situation did not improve. She maintained a composed image at work, but privately she struggled with exhaustion and a lingering sense of loss. The stability she once found through Vasily was gone. Replaced by routine and solitude, her world had become small and quiet. During this fragile time, she longed for support but couldn't express it. Emotional emptiness often opens the door to new relationships that feel like a reprieve, a chance to regain balance. This unresolved grief and persistent isolation became the setting for a new connection that would soon shape the next chapter of her life. By late 2022, someone new entered Anna's life, a man who, at first, seemed completely unconnected to her. Vladimir Maklakov, 33, was a local and the son of one of Vasily's old acquaintances. His family owned a large logging company. Although Vladimir was officially its CEO, everyone knew his father managed the real business operations. Locals described Vladimir as someone who did whatever he wanted without worrying about the consequences. His habits were the opposite of Anna's orderly lifestyle. He was known to drink heavily, sometimes acted aggressively, and had a reputation for volatile relationships. Longtime acquaintances said that he had been through many tumultuous relationships, often argued with others, and was also suspected of using substances. Some people affirm that Vladimir's first marriage fell apart after only a few months, and his later relationship ended when the woman left him, taking their son with her. These behaviors indicated impulsiveness, a lack of self-control, and an unstable lifestyle. Meanwhile, Anna was organized, calm, and devoted to her work. A complete contrast to him. Ironically, it was this difference that allowed Vladimir to win her trust quickly. He overwhelmed her with attention, compliments, gifts, and promises of support. For someone still grieving a deep personal loss, that kind of reassurance must have felt like a lifeline. At the time, Anna was emotionally fragile, which made her more susceptible to his influence. Still, she kept the relationship private, whether it was out of discretion or awareness that others might disapprove. She never spoke openly about it. But this was the beginning of a romance that would later turn tragic, because they kept things hidden. Warning signs remained unnoticed until everything escalated. After several months, Vladimir's troubling behavior became obvious. Under the influence, he turned loud and unpredictable, lashing out over trivial matters. Those who knew him said such outbursts were typical of him. Anna rarely discussed these issues directly, but a close friend later remembered small hints. Anna seemed constantly exhausted, avoided details about her relationship, and often changed the subject. These behaviors indicated their relationship was no longer stable. All of this described a man who was unstable and difficult to predict. So why didn't Anna see the warning signs? Their relationship followed a familiar pattern, a phase of caring, promises, then arguments and outbursts of emotion. This was followed by apologies, promises to change, and overflowing displays of affection to make amends. This cycle left Anna both insecure and hopeful that things would get better. In her vulnerable moments, any act of kindness from Vladimir provided Anna with a sense of security. That's why she keeps staying by his side. A moody man, yet one who occasionally shows the tenderness she needs. Gradually, this dynamic shaped their relationship, while the warning signs became increasingly obscured. By the end of December 2022, Anna and Vladimir had gone through many tense periods, but they still decided to celebrate the new year together. For Anna, this was likely a chance to start fresh, to find peace as 2023 began. They traveled to Moscow and stayed in the apartment on Polina Osipenko Street, the same one Vasily had once given to Anna. Vladimir later told investigators that they had rented the apartment, which wasn't true. Perhaps he wanted to downplay his place in the relationship. From late December until January 2nd, there were no visible signs of conflict. They took walks, went to cafes, and even took photos together. On January 2nd, they had a professional photo session. The photographer recalled that the couple looked relaxed and comfortable, showing no tension. In those pictures, they appeared like any other couple, enjoying the holidays, cheerful, calm, and unaware of what was about to happen. That day turned out to be Anna's last. After the photo shoot, they returned to the apartment for a quiet evening. Everything seemed normal, a peaceful holiday night in Moscow. Dinner, conversation, and rest. But in the hours that followed, that calm would unravel, revealing something much darker beneath the surface. What could have been a new beginning instead became the prelude to tragedy. The evening began peacefully, with small talk and future plans. After that, the topic of their conversation shifted to their future, a subject that both of them had been thinking about for a long time. For Vladimir, it was time to assert his position. He unexpectedly proposed, without any prior preparation or discussion. He saw it as a way to solidify the relationship, to assert control. But Anna didn't share his view. She calmly refused, explaining that she wasn't ready to commit to a lifetime with someone who behaved erratically. There was no shouting, no argument, no emotional outburst, and that quiet, composed refusal became the turning point. Perhaps Vladimir understood that calmness as indifference, the very thing he feared most. He viewed the rejection as an insult, even a betrayal. That night, he had been drinking, further destabilizing his emotions and making him more prone to losing control. The conversation quickly became tense. His voice grew louder, his attitude aggressive, and then it erupted into violence. When Anna tried to leave, Vladimir blocked her way. She ran into the bathroom, the only place she could close the door to hide. But the door was weak, the lock unable to withstand the pressure. Just seconds later, the door was broken down. That moment marked the beginning of 3 horrific minutes that forensic experts later meticulously recreated. The autopsy report showed Anna was stabbed 247 times, a number that speaks volumes, reflecting a complete breakdown of control and frenzy. The report emphasized that there were no pauses, a clear sign of extreme emotional disturbance at the time of the attack. It's important to note how quickly everything unfolded. The timeline laid out by the forensic team underscores just how rapidly the situation deteriorated. During those moments, neighbors began hearing noises. First, dull thuds, then sharp cries that soon turned into muffled sounds of a struggle. Several residents called emergency services around the same time, reporting signs of violence. However, records later showed that the rescue team responded slower than the standard response time for this type of situation. That delay became a major focus of the investigation. When officers finally arrived, the apartment door was locked, forcing them to break in. Inside, they found Vladimir lying near Anna's body. He was drunk, his clothes stained with blood, but he offered no resistance when apprehended. His speech rambling and incoherent, his first words were included in the official report. He said he hadn't meant for things to go that far. His behavior was erratic, alternating between confused explanations and total detachment. At that point, investigators had the basic outline of the case, the scene, the weapon, and the suspect found on site. Still, key questions remained about how the incident unfolded, how long it took for help to arrive, and how much alcohol had influenced Vladimir's actions. These details would become central to reconstructing what happened that night and shaping the investigation's direction. News of Anna's death spread quickly in the cities where her voice was well known, and in Moscow. Her colleagues in radio were shocked, describing her as dedicated and professional, qualities that made her death all the more tragic. National media began reiterating the pressures Anna faced after Vasily Solovyov's death, and the mental anguish she experienced. Many theories were put forward, from personal conflicts to issues of inheritance from Vasily. But all remained speculation. Lacking concrete evidence, the trial began with a confession. Vladimir admitted to the attack but tried to present it as the result of an emotional breakdown, hoping for leniency. He was charged with 2 counts causing serious injury, resulting in death and unlawful entry with violence. During the trial, Vladimir's demeanor was markedly different from the night of the crime. He appeared calm, expressed remorse, and claimed he acted under extreme emotional distress. His lawyer emphasized his voluntary confession and the fact that he never tried to flee, arguing this should reduce his sentence. The defense also presented a letter of confirmation from his hometown and previous records of alcohol addiction treatment, aiming to portray him as someone who had tried to change but failed in a moment of weakness. The entire strategy was geared towards depicting the incident as a moment of loss of control, rather than a premeditated crime. After considering the nature of the incident, the timing, and the forensic findings, the court sentenced Vladimir Maklakov to 14 years in a high-security facility. For Anna's family, the verdict brought mixed feelings. The punishment was significant, yet it still felt insufficient compared to the magnitude of their loss. Anna's parents filed a civil suit seeking 5 million rubles in damages. Their goal was not financial gain but formal acknowledgement of responsibility. Meanwhile, Vladimir's attempts to portray himself as a victim of circumstances were seen as an evasion of responsibility. The court's decision officially closed the case, but many questions remained about the choices, warning signs, and missed opportunities that led to a tragedy that might have been prevented. After his conviction, Vladimir's future seemed sealed. He would face many years in prison under strict conditions with little hope of pardon. Yet soon after, his lawyer submitted a petition for him to join a military deployment under a special operations contract, a legal option that allows inmates to replace most of their sentence with military service. The petition was approved, and Vladimir joined a group chosen for accelerated training before deployment. His participation in this program later became grounds for early release. By 2025, just 2 years later, he was back home. News of his release shocked many in Vologda. Residents vividly remembered the details of the crime and did not expect someone guilty of such a serious offense to be freed so quickly. For many, this was surprising, especially for those who believed that justice meant the full execution of the sentence. Upon his return, Vladimir moved near his family. According to people who knew him, he helped his father with daily tasks and deliberately stayed away from public places where he might be recognized. Before long, rumors spread that he was seeing someone new, igniting renewed public discussion. The contrast between Vladimir's quiet new life and the grief still felt by Anna's family was striking. There are no public records of his employment, and open sources do not reveal whether he plans to continue his military service or move elsewhere. What is clear is that he maintains a low profile and avoids any public involvement in matters related to his case. Legally, he faces no special restrictions other than periodically registering at his official place of residence. For Anna's mother, however, his release was devastating. She could not comprehend how the man responsible for her daughter's death was now free. The gap between the court's sentence and the time actually served stirred strong public concern. Many questioned whether the system truly reflects society's expectations for justice in such serious cases. Thus, the story reached its final chapter, one where the legal verdict became only part of a larger, more painful discussion about fairness, justice, and the lasting weight of consequences. In the eyes of everyone, Ebby Stepak was a beautiful Ezin, strong young woman, yearning for freedom and wanting to assert herself. But in just a moment, her life took a dark turn, full of unpredictable twists. One morning in the fall of 2015 in Little Rock, Arkansas, Ebby left her grandmother's house with a promise to return soon. No one expected that it would be the last time her family saw her. 2 days later, Ebby's car was found in a park. The keys were still in the ignition. Her wallet, phone, and even her contact lenses were still in the car. But Ebby was gone. The family searched frantically. While the police hesitated, the days of waiting stretched into months, then years, until a heartbreaking discovery ended all hope. Ebby's body was found in a concrete pipe, just steps from where the car had been abandoned. This is not just a story about a young woman whose future was taken away, but also a tragedy of silence from justice, of missed opportunities, of a family exhausted by waiting and helpless before an investigative system that they have lost faith in. In the darkness that surrounds Ebby Stepak's death, the question remains, who made her disappear, and why? Ebby Stepak was born on March 31, 1997, in Little Rock, Arkansas, to Peter and Lori. After her parents divorced, she lived with her mother but stayed in contact with her father. Her family included her brother Trevor, her sister Harris Elizabeth, and her half-brother Ethan, all of whom were part of her life. Michael Jernigan became an important figure to her after marrying her mother and becoming her stepfather. Ebby attended Lisa Academy, a private school where she was diligent, curious, and engaged. In her senior year, however, she transferred unexpectedly to Little Rock Central High, a public school. That change, along with other events in 2015, marked a turning point. Since childhood, Ebby longed for independence and was passionate about exploring the world. She loved foreign languages and taught herself Spanish, Turkish, and Hebrew, focusing on pronunciation, intonación, and cultural nuances. Ebby loves fashion, makeup, and hair. For her, style is more than just clothes. It's a way to express herself. She changes her appearance often, trying different styles with purpose. Photography was another passion. She captured nature, small details, and city scenes, finding beauty in everyday life. She loved the outdoors, especially the ocean, which brought her peace. She often shared those experiences with friends. Ebby's personality was strong, kind, and fair, with little tolerance for hypocrisy. In 2015, she decided to live independently, moving out of her brother Trevor's house to live with friends and her grandmother. Her parents were worried, but for her, it was a big step toward independence. That summer, Ebby landed her first job at a Foot Locker store in McCain Mall. At first, her parents were proud of her efforts, but they soon noticed a change. She was home less often, becoming more distant and unapproachable. New people entered her life, bringing a different energy. She was still bubbly and confident, but she became more stubborn and defiant of authority. Not only was she not afraid of change, she seemed to actively seek it. Those around her sensed the change in her. Around this time, she started dating someone her family didn't trust. They didn't argue with her about it, but they were uneasy and worried the relationship might lead to trouble. As her social circle changed, so did her behavior. Ebby began to pull away. Her life moved into a private space her parents couldn't access. After switching to public school, she started skipping classes. The school notified her parents, but conversations at home went nowhere. Ebby held firm to her desire for independence and decision-making. Talks about rules and responsibility always ended without resolution. Her parents no longer knew who she was spending time with, and their concern grew as their influence waned. Her close friend Danielle noticed the change too. They had been inseparable at Lisa Academy and remained close after Ebby transferred. But that summer, Danielle felt the distance. They no longer shared everything. Ebby became guarded and withdrawn, and she didn't want to hang out. Their conversations lost their connection. It felt like Ebby was retreating into herself. What worried Danielle most wasn't just Ebby's behavior. It was the new group she was with. They were bold, reckless, and confrontational. Unlike her former friends, they didn't respect authority and pushed boundaries. Ebby seemed drawn to them. as if searching for something she couldn't find elsewhere. Danielle couldn't understand what it was, but she had a sinking feeling. These changes weren't temporary. They were lasting. By early fall, tension was rising. Abby was skipping school, staying out without telling anyone where she was, and sometimes disappearing for days. Her parents were very worried, but any attempt to set rules turned into a fight. Abby made it clear she wouldn't accept pressure or control. Her family realized she no longer saw herself as part of them. She was living by her own rules, and they weren't included. For Danielle, that summer ended their friendship. She kept in touch, but Abby grew more distant. Each conversation felt colder. Danielle felt that Abby was rushing into danger, though she didn't say it out loud. And deep down, Danielle knew they were unlikely to ever get back to the way things were. On October 23, 2015, Abby went to a party. Danielle, who had seen her recently, chose not to go. The crowd made her uneasy. The next morning brought shocking news. Abby arrived at her parents' house, shaken but composed, and said she had been intentionally assaulted by a group the night before. She named 4 young men and insisted the assault had been recorded on a phone. She offered few details. She said she'd been in shock, but conscious. She didn't describe what led up to the attack or much about the party. Her message was simple. It happened, and there was video proof. For her mother, Lori, and stepfather, Michael Jernigan, it was a terrible shock. Michael remembered that Abby wasn't asking what to do. She had decided. She wanted to report it. She was clear and determined. They agreed Michael would take her to the police station later that day. They didn't set a time, but it was understood. A few hours later, Abby left. She never returned. Afterward, she only communicated with her family through her grandmother and did not mention again what she had told that morning. That conversation was the only time Abby spoke openly to her family about the attack. The trip to the station never happened. No report was filed. Since her conversation with Michael, she no longer went home, dropped out of school, and gradually withdrew from the world around her. Later, it emerged that on October 24, the same day she told her family, she reached out to Danielle. She said she planned to visit her brother and suggested they meet the next day. She was still making plans and seeking support. This didn't look like withdrawal. It looked like a push for justice after trauma. That morning was more than just a confessional moment. It was a turning point. And for some, perhaps that was also the reason she kept quiet. After opening up to her family, Abby continued to text Danielle, asking to stay the night like before. Danielle agreed. For Abby, it was a way to return to a familiar, safe space with someone she still trusted. Danielle said Abby seemed tense, acted reserved, and spoke hesitantly. Sometimes Abby mentioned those troubles but didn't go into detail. Danielle didn't press, but sensed Abby was holding back, weighed down by something she wasn't ready to share. After that, Abby asked Danielle to help re-pierce an old earring hole that had closed up. Danielle helped her. The next morning, October 25, Abby left Danielle's place and went to her grandmother Peggy Holman's home. The visit wasn't planned, but Peggy wasn't surprised. Abby often dropped by. The day was calm. They watched SpongeBob, ate ice cream, and talked. Nothing in Abby's mood seemed alarming. She stayed for dinner. Around 8 p.m., she said she needed to meet her stepfather and reminded her grandmother she still planned to go to the police. The plan remained. Before leaving, Abby hugged her grandparents, told them she loved them, and promised to return soon. Nothing in her voice or behavior suggested worry. She seemed calm, confident, and at peace. That was the last time anyone in her family saw her. The final confirmed moment was her departure from her grandmother's house on the evening of October 25. After that, everything is unknown. That's where communication ended. When Abby disappeared, there were no signs she intended to leave or run away. She said she'd be back soon, but she never returned. That broken promise was the first clear warning. That night, around 2 a.m., Abby's brother, Trevor, woke up to hear her calling. He answered immediately. She sounded panicked. She said she was outside his house. Trevor rushed out, but no one was there. No Abby. No car. He called her back. She answered and said she was in her car but didn't know where it was parked. Her voice was unlike anything he'd heard from her before. She sounded confused and detached, unable to describe her location. Then, she said that she was gone, and the call ended. That was the last thing she ever said to him. Trevor tried calling repeatedly, but she never picked up. Her phone went silent. About 6 hours had passed between her leaving her grandmother's house and that call, a gap still unexplained. Later, it emerged that Abby made 2 brief calls to emergency services that night, each under a minute. No recordings survived. Authorities said they had no technical records, no files, no logs. Yet the family confirmed the calls occurred. That discrepancy raised serious questions. No one knows what she was trying to report. Maybe she was in danger, trying to share her location, or believed she was being followed. What is clear is that her actions did not resemble someone planning to disappear. They looked like someone reacting to an urgent threat or a situation spiraling out of control. When they couldn't reach her the next morning, her mother and stepfather called non-stop. At first, the phone rang. Later, it went dead. That change convinced them something was wrong. The next day, they tried to file a missing person report, but were turned away. Police said it was too soon, and that procedures required waiting before she could be considered missing. Law enforcement leaned toward the idea that Abby left voluntarily. She was an adult, independent, and recently seeking more freedom. Her family disagreed. This was out of character. She had stayed in close contact until the very end. The sudden silence and disappearance didn't fit. From that point on, time was critical. Abby Stepak was officially missing, and the gap between her family's urgency and the authorities' response marked the start of a long series of missed opportunities, longer than anyone imagined. 2 days after Abby vanished, on October 27, 2015, a passerby found her 2003 Volkswagen Passat in an empty lot near Chalamont Park, by the woods. He had seen it there the day before and reported it. But no patrol responded that night. When he called again the next day, police finally checked it out. The car was Abby's. The keys were in the ignition. The gas tank was empty. The battery was dead. And there was no visible damage. Abby's personal belongings were in the car and in the trunk. Wallet, clothes, phone, ID wallet, bank cards and contact lens case. She was nearsighted and could not see clearly without her contact lenses. Leaving behind her phone, wallet, and lenses, things she needed daily, strongly suggested she did not plan to disappear. She didn't bring any money, didn't contact anyone, and left behind even her essential belongings. Everything pointed away from a voluntary disappearance, yet police took no special precautions. They did not tape off the car or treat it as a potential crime scene. The inspection was superficial. The trunk was left open. That night, a heavy rainstorm drenched everything. Documents, clothing, and any possible evidence. Abby's belongings were later returned to her parents. Water damaged. They had to pack and dry them themselves. Understanding the importance of these pieces of evidence, the family carefully photographed each item, then bagged them and stored them safely at home, hoping to salvage something. Although the car was found, the seriousness of the incident remained unrecognized. There was no formal investigation, no forensic team. The scene wasn't secured or analyzed. An omission many believe cost crucial evidence forever. Items in the car could have held fingerprints, DNA, or other biological material, but none of it was documented or preserved, violating basic investigative procedures. To Abby's family, this made it clear: Authorities weren't taking her disappearance seriously. A young woman was missing. Her car was abandoned in a remote park, with personal items left behind. There was no contact, no indication of a plan, yet still no urgency from police. The car's condition, its location, and what remained inside all suggested she left under duress or in a hurry. She had no known reason to be in that area alone. It didn't make sense. Since then, her family has believed that she did not leave voluntarily, even though the investigation stalled. All proposals to expedite the case were met with mechanical, formulaic responses. There were no canvasses of neighbors, no interviews with friends, no organized search of the park where the car was found, and no requests for nearby surveillance footage. Her parents turned to the media, posted flyers, recruited volunteers, and contacted private investigators. But without access to evidence or police databases, their efforts were limited. Each day without official progress made rebuilding the timeline harder. Hope for a breakthrough faded, and the sense of helplessness grew. Nearly 8 months passed before anything changed. Only after mounting public pressure and persistent requests from Ebi's parents was the case reclassified. Ebi Stepich was officially declared a missing person. This paved the way for a full investigation. But by then it was too late. Important leads had disappeared. Potential witnesses had moved on or forgotten, and evidence that could have revealed the truth was likely lost. In the spring of 2016, Margie Foley, the mother of a close friend of Ebi's, returned to Chalamont Park. It was no ordinary visit. She was still haunted by the place. Ebi's car had been found there, and a large concrete sewer pipe ran underground near the parking lot. Police had never shown interest in it, but Margie couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As she approached, she smelled a strong, putrid odor, characteristic of decomposition. Certain that something was rotting inside, she called 911. An officer arrived within the hour. Margie pointed to the pipe and described the smell, stressing that it wasn't normal park runoff or trash. The officer stood near the pipe briefly, then stepped back without trying to look inside. He calmly explained that storm drains often collect debris, stagnant water, and organic waste, especially after rain, and that such smells weren't unusual. He said he saw nothing suspicious and didn't plan to investigate further. Margie pressed him to use a flashlight or call in a C-9 unit. He refused, insisting there was no sign of a crime. He left without checking the pipe. The incident wasn't documented. There was no report, no follow-up, and no agency inspection. No one connected this detail to Ebi's abandoned Volkswagen. It was later discovered that the pipeline was less than 20 meters from where Ebi's car was found. Just a glance downward would have revealed it. But because of this negligence, a potential piece of evidence was missed, and the scene remained almost intact for nearly 2 years. For Ebi's family, it was heartbreaking. Time dragged on. Weeks, 2 months, years, and Ebi was still missing. Since the day she disappeared, her family existed in a constant state of waiting. Thousands of days passed with no news and no leads. The uncertainty became its own torment. Law enforcement remained at a standstill. Eventually, Ebi's father hired private investigator Monty Vickers, determined not to let the case die. He began with her final communications. What stood out were the messages Ebi sent the night before she vanished. In them, she directly confronted several young men she said had assaulted her. Her tone was firm. She planned to go to the police. She mentioned a video and demanded they come forward. She made it clear she would not stay silent. The next day, Ebi disappeared. To her family, the connection was obvious. She confronted her alleged attackers, and soon after, she was gone. They believed it wasn't a coincidence, that someone wanted to silence her, yet police didn't act. They issued no warrants to access the phones of the men Ebi had named. Those messages, potentially containing threats, admissions, or vital clues, were never formally examined. The reason given: insufficient cause, another missed opportunity. Despite Ebby naming names and making direct accusations, the investigation stopped at surface-level interviews. No digital footprints were pursued. No devices were seized. The young men remained witnesses, not suspects. Monty repeatedly highlighted systemic failures, lack of urgency, bureaucratic inertia, and no coherent investigative strategy. For 3 years, police didn't revisit those individuals, even as new information emerged. These missteps stalled the case. In fall 2018, a long-overlooked detail resurfaced: the concrete drainage pipe in Chalamont Park, near where Ebby's car was found in 2015. After 3 years, the police finally conducted a thorough search of the area. The results shocked everyone. Human remains were inside the pipe. The location was alarming, and a preliminary examination showed the remains were female. Within days, the identity was confirmed. It was Ebby Stepek. All along, she had been just steps from where her car was discovered. Right in the same park officers had visited, beside an area dismissed in both 2015 and 2016. It was the very spot previously pointed out, but never thoroughly searched. Because the body was so badly decomposed by time and the environment, investigators were unable to determine a cause of death. The condition of the remains prevented a full forensic analysis. The medical examiner could confirm only one thing: it was a homicide. The body did not end up in the pipe by accident. It was placed there intentionally. Beyond that, there were no conclusive findings, no defensive wounds, no usable biological evidence, nothing to point to a suspect. This discovery changed everything. It proved Ebby hadn't simply vanished. She had been there the whole time. If the pipe had been thoroughly searched in 2015, physical evidence might have been preserved. If the odor reported in 2016 had been taken seriously instead of dismissed as sewer smell, investigators might have determined what happened, or even who was responsible. Those chances are gone. The finding brought a bitter sense of finality. Ebby was found, but only her body, and her case was officially ruled a homicide. Even so, there was no real progress. Investigators identified no suspects, filed no charges, and presented no clear theory. Even the men Ebby named in her final messages, the ones she said had harmed her, were not treated as suspects and were not re-questioned. Her family got no answers. What should have been the beginning of justice became a legal impasse. No physical evidence, no access to key information, no forensic timeline. The case stalled. So did any hope of a trial. All that remained was a confirmed loss of life without a path to accountability. Ebby's mother, Lori, took the fight public, speaking on national platforms, giving interviews, and appearing on major TV programs, including an emotional interview on Dr. Phil. The family offered a $50,000 reward for information, funded by supporters, private donors, and nonprofits committed to their pursuit of justice. Still, no new leads emerged. No one came forward. Whether out of fear, loyalty, or self-preservation, those who might know something stayed silent. The public did not forget. Ebby's story continued through podcasts, YouTube investigations, and independent documentaries, kept alive by voices outside the system. Officially, however, there was nothing. Those Ebby had named carried on with their lives, jobs, families, freedom. Meanwhile, her loved ones remained in limbo, grieving, waiting, and facing the brutal reality that no one would be held accountable. Suspicions persisted, but suspicions are not evidence. Without hard proof, there would be no charges, no trial, no justice. That is where the story stands. A truth many can see, but that cannot be proved in court. It isn't justice, it's the absence of it, and that is the most painful part of all. One morning in May 2019, The city of Columbus, Georgia, was shocked by the news. Kelly Levinson, a dedicated paramedic who had saved many lives, had been murdered in her home. It all started with an emergency call from an elderly neighbor. They heard an argument, a loud bang, then complete silence. When the police broke down the door and burst in, they found Kelly lying motionless on the living room floor. A bullet wound through the head. No signs of a struggle. No chance to defend herself. A scene that clearly evoked a cold-blooded execution. The investigation quickly revealed a series of overlapping conflicts, an affair, a long-standing argument, jealousy, and alcoholism, all of which spiraled into a chain of events that led to Kelly's death. The suspect was no stranger. He is a man whom her family once trusted, the community once respected, and she herself once regarded as a pillar of support. Behind the curtain of tragedy is not only the meticulous investigation of the police, but also the tragedy of love, betrayal, and the downfall of a man who once stood in the ranks of protecting justice. This story is more than just a murder. It also reflects the fragility of trust, and the harsh reality that sometimes danger comes from those we trust most. On May 11, 2019, police in Columbus, Georgia, received an emergency call from an elderly neighbor. He reported suspected domestic violence at the home of 44 years old Kelly Levinson because he heard her arguing with her boyfriend. The witness said he heard a violent altercation followed by a loud bang that sounded like a gunshot. Officers arrived within minutes. They found the elderly caller outside. He had phoned for help, but had not entered the house, which was locked. He insisted he hadn't tried to force the door. Since no one had been seen leaving after the gunshot, he feared the shooter might still be inside and that Kelly had been shot. The police decided to break down the door and enter the house, ready to go. As there was a possibility that the suspect was still inside, it soon appeared the attacker had fled, possibly in Kelly's car, which was missing from the driveway. Kelly was found unresponsive on the living room floor with a gunshot wound to the head. She was fully clothed. There were no signs of abuse, nor were there any defensive wounds that suggested a struggle. The scene suggested a sudden, execution-style killing. No other person was found in the home. Forensic investigators began processing the scene. Blood spatter on the wall and the position of Kelly's body helped reconstruct the shooting. A .45 caliber shell casing was found in the hallway outside the living room, farther from the body than expected. This, along with the trajectory of the wound, ruled out the possibility of Kelly harming herself. An examination showed that the entry and exit wound proved she was shot from behind. At this firing angle, she could not have shot herself. Investigators collected multiple cell phones belonging to Kelly for analysis. At first, police considered a robbery gone wrong, but a bank envelope with $3,000 in cash was found in the bedroom, and other valuables were untouched. Family and friends, who visited often, said this made a robbery unlikely. Nothing appeared out of place, and there were no signs of forced entry. All windows and doors were intact, suggesting Kelly likely knew her killer and let him in. Neighbors said they saw Kelly with a man she had recently started dating, and they often argued. Inside the home, numerous men's belongings supported the idea that she had been seeing someone regularly. However, no one could identify him by name, only a general description. Investigators collected items that might contain DNA, hair, or fingerprints, though lab work would take time. A black duffel bag in the living room immediately drew attention. It was empty and near Kelly's body, with hand-stitched initials WLT on the side, likely indicating the owner's name. Although the gunshot had disfigured the victim's face, the medical examiner soon confirmed the deceased was Kelly Levinson, the homeowner. This is a major shock to the authorities. Kelly is an emergency medical technician, well known to many police officers and respected for her dedication to saving lives. Thanks to her, many lives have been saved. Kelly, originally from Columbus, studied extensively to become a physician. By the time she died, she had earned a medical degree and an associate's degree in criminal justice from a local university. Professionally, she worked as an emergency medical technician and was considered highly qualified. Kelly prioritized helping others over her personal life. She never started a family or had children. She grew up in a close-knit household with her mother and brother, Gary. Her father had left long ago and was no longer in contact. Her mother and Gary are very close. They had endured many hardships together and always supported one another. Her mother was proud of both her children, especially Kelly's work in medicine. When the family learned of Kelly's death, it was the most devastating blow they had ever faced. Her mother and brother were determined to find out who was responsible. Detectives began interviewing neighbors and local residents who might have recognized Kelly's boyfriend or noticed anything suspicious. One neighbor reported suspicious activity in Kelly's yard on the night of the murder. She saw a stranger and initially thought he might be trying to break in. But when the man locked the door and walked to Kelly's car in the driveway, she reconsidered. He used a key to unlock and start the car, which reassured her, and she went to bed. However, she did get a good look at him. He was fair-skinned with light, possibly gray, hair. The neighbor worked with police to create a composite sketch based on her detailed description. When officers showed the sketch around, several neighbors identified the blonde man as Kelly's boyfriend. Kelly's mother immediately disputed this, insisting that Kelly hadn't been seeing anyone recently. She said the man was not a boyfriend but a close friend, 52 years old William Leonard Talley. She spoke highly of him, noting their long friendship and his support during difficult times. She also believed he worked in law enforcement and was certain he could not have been involved in the murder. However, the police began to pay attention to this detail because there were many coincidences. For example, the initials on the duffel bag next to Kelly's body matched William's first and last name. With no other strong leads, he became the primary suspect. While Kelly's family maintained his innocence, her friends told a different story. They said Kelly had been dating a man named William for a long time. Kelly rarely mentioned him because he was married and had children, so she hid his specific identity. She had doubts about the relationship but felt comfortable with him. Her friends were skeptical about his promise of a divorce, but she believed him when he said that divorce proceedings had begun. William spoke negatively about his wife and promised to end the marriage. Kelly's best friend said Kelly was excited when William talked about a future together after the divorce. Yet she also sensed something was wrong. Kelly herself seemed unsure about the relationship and wanted to sort out her feelings, which may explain why she spoke so little about it. Even to friends, possibly out of fear of judgment, the best friend met William and noticed controlling behavior. It began to seem that Kelly's silence wasn't just uncertainty or embarrassment about seeing a married man. Rather, William appeared to be manipulating her and limiting what she shared about him. A deeply troubling sign. William disliked Kelly's best friend, and the feeling was mutual. He tried to limit their contact, but failed to remove her from Kelly's life. This led to frequent arguments and conflicts, which only heightened Kelly's anxiety. To Kelly's friend, the relationship between Kelly and William appeared to be abusive. Suspicion toward William kept growing. Kelly's friend told detectives she had repeatedly warned Kelly about manipulation, but Kelly didn't fully recognize the danger, likely because she had never faced such behavior before. At the end of the interview, the friend said that in all their years together, only one person in Kelly's inner circle could have killed her: her boyfriend, William. Detectives then visited Kelly's workplace to find corroborating evidence. They found none. Many of her colleagues believe William is just a good friend, as she has described him. No one could confirm the friend's claims about controlling behavior. William himself raised new suspicions. When the detective arrived at his house, he discovered that William had disappeared. He had been absent from home and work since the investigation began. This disappearance deepened suspicion. It looked like he might be on the run. Ballistics later showed the bullets recovered from Kelly's head were fired from a Glock 45 caliber. The medical examiner concluded she was shot from behind at close range. Based on gunpowder residue on her body and clothing, this supported the theory that the killer knew her. She likely let the person into her home, as there were no signs of forced entry. The motive for the close-range shooting remained unclear, and no firearm was found at the scene. This slowed the case because investigators lacked a direct link to a suspect. However, they did recover valuable evidence. Fingerprints on a vodka bottle in the kitchen trash. The prints matched William Leonard Talley. He was in the law enforcement database, not due to a prior conviction, but because he was an officer with the Columbus Police Department. Having joined in July 2002, at the time of the murder, William was a patrol sergeant, a former Army Ranger, and part of a special weapons and tactics training team. This aligned with other witness statements and complicated the case. As a police sergeant and former serviceman, he likely had connections and knew procedures that could help him obstruct the investigation or evade accountability. Despite this, progress was slow. The fingerprints that matched Williams were not enough to convict him, as they could have been left before the murder. Detectives focused on motive. Those close to him said that when he met Kelly, his marriage was faltering. He had been married for years and had 2 children. Ongoing conflicts after the birth of their second child left him off balance. Kelly seemed like an escape, kind, understanding, and empathetic, and the two began an affair. Police suspected a love triangle was involved in the murder. William's wife, Rebecca Talley, may also have been involved. Rebecca was living apart at the time, so they tried to contact her while William was on the run. During this period, a new witness, a neighbor of Kelly's, came to the police. He claimed to know William well and said William had run to Kelly's place right after the murder and confessed, effectively admitting guilt. However, this testimony was unconvincing. The behavior he described was too unusual. Subsequent investigations showed that the witness had no connection to William's family. It was most likely a fabricated allegation intended to attract attention, amplified by the media, which was eager for news about the case. William was still nowhere to be found, but the police quickly found Rebecca. Detectives interviewed Rebecca. She was maintaining the household, caring for the children, and working. She confirmed long-standing marital problems and said she had considered divorce for over a year because she saw no future with William. The children were the only reason they had stayed together. Shortly before Christmas 2018, she decided on a permanent separation. Rebecca said she knew her husband, William, was having an affair with Kelly, but she didn't care because she wanted to end the marriage. She also hoped that the new relationship would help William calm down and reduce stress. Despite the separation, Rebecca stayed in regular contact with William as a friend. She also knew that William and Kelly frequently argued. According to Rebecca, he was very jealous. Even when they were still together, they argued because he suspected her of being unfaithful. She had witnessed a similar confrontation between William and Kelly. Kelly engaged actively in these arguments and had her own grievances. Their disputes escalated quickly into mutual provocations and insults, deeply toxic dynamics. Rebecca felt Kelly often fueled the conflict. After that day, he said that if Rebecca hadn't been there that evening, they probably would have gotten into a fight. The picture that emerged was of a deeply unhealthy relationship headed for disaster. Still, Rebecca doesn't believe William would resort to violence without extreme provocation. She doubted his involvement in the murder, noting he had never been physically aggressive with her. Though he was intensely jealous, William's outbursts were especially common when he had been drinking. Police found an empty vodka bottle at Kelly's home, which led them to suspect that a jealous confrontation, worsened by alcohol and Kelly's refusal to back down, might have occurred. Kelly was stubborn and stood her ground. Investigators theorized that William provoked another argument and, in a rage, shot her. Other witnesses confirmed William had been drinking more heavily lately. He complained of work pressure over the past few months and seemed increasingly on edge. Rebecca shared useful information but claimed she did not know where he was. At first, nothing linked her to Kelly's murder. However, she refused to show detectives her text messages with William, which raised mild suspicion. Even so, this was not enough to consider Rebecca a suspect. Detectives hadn't required the messages. They were testing her reaction. It also emerged that one of the phones found in Kelly's home belonged to William. The police awaited further results. The investigation did not substantiate any suspicion against Rebecca. She and William had been in contact, but mostly about the children and household matters. Messages on William's phone showed discussions about his alcohol use and other domestic issues. Despite their divorce, they maintained a functional relationship. A key witness was a friend and colleague whom William had known and been in contact with for over 10 years. The friend confirmed that William was a heavy drinker and drank regularly. But he was shocked to learn that William had become the prime suspect in Kelly's murder. Another colleague noted that William rarely shared personal details about his marriage or any affair. Both William and Kelly lead private lives, which makes it difficult to gather information. After completing the phone examination, investigators focused on text messages. Many texts confirmed William's psychological struggles and alcohol addiction. He likely avoided treatment for fear of losing his job, and his condition worsened. A thorough background check uncovered a disturbing fact. At 7:41 p.m. on March 11, 2018, officers responded to Kelly's home, where William confronted them while brandishing his service pistol. He appeared intoxicated and possibly under the influence of additional substances. He behaved erratically and threatened both the officers and himself. It took 3 sets of handcuffs to restrain him, and he was taken to the hospital. After receiving treatment, he was sent home. Despite the severity of the incident, William was only suspended for a time, and the matter was kept quiet. Fortunately, no one was injured. Kelly forgave him, and he faced minimal consequences. Later, he committed another similar disciplinary violation. As a result, William was again briefly suspended and assigned community service, which had no apparent effect. He returned to duty and continued working. Once detectives gathered sufficient evidence, they obtained a search warrant for William's home. There, they found a pistol and ammunition of the same caliber as the shell casing recovered at the murder scene. Ballistics indicated the cartridges matched, further linking William to the crime. However, the pistol itself was not the murder weapon. This raised concerns that William, who was then at large, might be armed with the actual murder weapon. A warning was issued to all units. Given his history of violence, officers were cautioned that the arrest could be dangerous. Meanwhile, finding Kelly's car remained a priority. In late spring 2019, the department received a report of a black Toyota pickup that had left the road and overturned north of Columbus. The vehicle's description and license plate matched Kelly's missing truck. The driver had lost control while fleeing a traffic stop. A patrol unit had spotted the truck and attempted to pull it over, but the driver accelerated. The truck was badly damaged, but the driver survived. William had been driving. He suffered minor injuries, received medical treatment, and provided DNA samples. He then underwent a mental health evaluation. When informed he was the prime suspect in Kelly's murder, he caused a scene, screaming his innocence, resisting, and attempting to assault officers. His outburst was so loud that the interrogation had to be paused, but he was calmed relatively quickly. Experts later concluded he was feigning mental illness. Forensic evaluations found no evidence of mental disorders or any condition that could explain an uncontrollable violent outburst or a murder. Despite the mounting evidence, William refused to confess. Prosecutors began assembling a cohesive case. The recovered truck was seized and examined. Inside, investigators found a Glock pistol matching the caliber of the shell casings from Kelly's home. Forensic analysis confirmed it was the murder weapon. In the trunk, they discovered several bottles of vodka, identical to one found in Kelly's trash. With these findings, A clear narrative emerged. William struggled with alcohol, which affected his job and family. A love triangle developed between Kelly, Rebecca, and William. Eventually, Rebecca filed for divorce. Financial troubles from child support payments made things worse. Ongoing stress and alcohol use led to angry outbursts, and William eventually developed insomnia. He saw a therapist who prescribed medication. Combined with alcohol, the medication may have further destabilized his mental state. That was the core of the defense's argument, which they supported with evidence. They claimed that when William drank, he became angry and unpredictable. According to this version of events, that's what happened on May 11, 2019. The situation became tense. William went to Kelly's house, argued again, and in a fit of rage, he shot her in the back of the head. He was charged with murder, committed in a fit of passion, aggravated by the use of a firearm. In November of that year, a hearing set his bail at $1 million. He posted bail and awaited trial at home. During the trial, he admitted guilt, but claimed he didn't understand what he was doing. Surprisingly, he had considerable support. Even his ex-wife, Rebecca, said she didn't believe he was capable of such a crime and insisted the shooting was accidental. William's lawyers argued that his mental health issues should be defended as psychosis and that prison would prevent him from receiving proper treatment. The court rejected the mental illness claims. On September 28, 2020, William Leonard Talley confessed to the murder and was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. In the summer of 1990, in a sleepy Wisconsin town, Barrett Beck, an 18-year-old girl with musical dreams and aspirations, embarked on her first trip, a seemingly open door to the future, but just hours after leaving her family, Barrett disappeared in broad daylight. Her van was found with unusual markings, a torn red shirt, and an irreplaceable void in the hearts of her loved ones. When her body was found more than a month later, strangled and dumped in a deserted ditch, the small community was plunged into fear and obsession. Who extinguished that bright light? Who robbed a gentle, talented, and hopeful girl of her future? Why does a case that seems clear-cut become murky when clues and suspects keep changing, and justice is delayed for decades? Barrett Beck was born on April 18, 1972, in Sturtevant, Wisconsin, a small town of about 7,000 people. She had a younger brother named Ben. Everyone remarked that Barrett was intelligent, talented, and had loved music since childhood. This passion grew even stronger as she turned 18. Barrett dreamed of pursuing a career in the creative field. In high school, her talent was evident. She played the violin, piano, and many other instruments, and sang very well. In the summer of 1989, she toured the United States with a Christian band. Besides, faith is an important part of her life. In high school, Barrett dated Curtis. He proposed, but she felt it was too early because she wanted to prioritize her studies and career. They agreed to take it slow, at least until they graduated from college, but they were still engaged and things were going well. Barrett had chosen a college and aimed to become financially independent from her parents. She was ambitious and didn't want the typical teen jobs. Even without a degree, she set her sights higher. Instead of working as a waitress or store clerk, she decided to seek a secretarial position at a construction company. She found the job by chance and felt confident because of her strong computer skills. She signed up for an interview and quickly impressed the manager. Despite not having any qualifications, she was hired on the condition that she attend a 3-day computer training course for new employees. This was a job with good salary and promising opportunity, so she decided to join. The training was in Appleton, about 150 kilometers away. Barrett asked her family for help, but no one could accompany her. Her mother was recovering from an injury. Her father was working and caring for her mother. Her brother was too young, and her fiancé, Curtis, couldn't get time off. Barrett saw this as a challenge rather than a setback. She didn't want to miss the chance to land a better job and improve her finances. So she decided to make the trip alone. It would be her first long-distance trip without someone accompanying her, and she was understandably nervous. Barrett prepared carefully for the seminar scheduled for July 17, 1990. She packed meticulously, made a list of essentials, and got her two-tone 1987 phone ready, including adding a roof rack. It was a popular, comfortable, and practical vehicle at the time. On July 17, she woke early, double-checked everything, said goodbye to her family, and drove to Curtis's house to see him before leaving town. After spending some time together, she set off. Her first stop was in Fond du Lac, about 100 kilometers away. She visited a large shopping center, bought cosmetics and travel items, including a whitening kit, and left the receipt in her van. This was around 11 o'clock a.m. Trouble began when she didn't arrive in Appleton at the scheduled time. The supervisor who had interviewed her and was expecting her at the training session noticed her absence. At first, she assumed Barrett was simply running late. Since cell phones were not common at the time, the supervisor could not contact Barrett directly, so she called the phone number Barrett had provided to her family. When the supervisor contacted Barrett's parents, they were confused and worried. They said they had seen her off early that morning and were waiting for her to call upon arrival. They assumed her silence was due to travel delays or a busy schedule, not realizing something more serious might have happened. Barrett's mother, Diane, was recovering from a snowmobile accident and couldn't go looking for her herself, but she was extremely worried and couldn't sit still. She called Barrett's boyfriend, Curtis, and learned that Barrett had left him some time ago. She then contacted all of Barrett's friends, but none knew where she was. Barrett's father decided to act. He put Diane in the car and drove to Appleton. There, he confirmed that Barrett had never arrived and hadn't checked into the hotel room he'd reserved for her. At that point, it was clear something was wrong. The parents knew that Barrett was a responsible person, took her job very seriously, and was on her way to an important event that had a significant impact on her future. They immediately started searching and called the police. The police do not use the excuse of waiting 24 hours. They recognized the seriousness of the situation and acted immediately. They organized multiple search parties. The number of volunteers quickly increased. Barrett's family was devastated and offered a substantial reward for information, $75,000. They hoped it would help bring her home alive. Instead, it triggered a flood of false tips. Rumors spread. Calls poured in, and investigators lost precious time following leads that went nowhere. On July 19, 2 days after the search began, Barrett's travel-converted van was found abandoned in a shopping center parking lot near the store where she had last been seen in Fond du Lac. Multiple witnesses said the van hadn't been there on July 17 or 18. Patrols who had driven by several times also reported seeing nothing unusual earlier. An inspection of the van revealed troubling details. The odometer showed more than 500 kilometers, even though the trip to Fond du Lac should have been around 100. Inside, officers found empty cigarette packs, numerous wrappers, and loose tobacco. Even though Barrett didn't smoke, about 70 items were collected from the vehicle, many of which the family could not identify and insisted did not belong to her. Barrett herself was missing, and there were no clues pointing to her whereabouts. There were, however, ominous signs. Her red shirt, the one she planned to wear to the seminar and considered a lucky charm, was found in the van. It was badly damaged. A large section had been torn away, and the missing piece was not found in or around the vehicle. Detectives began to fear that Barrett's parents might never see their daughter alive again. Despite a careful analysis of the evidence, the investigation stalled. Weeks passed with no breakthroughs. Then, 5 weeks after Barrett went missing, on August 22, a farmer near Waupun noticed something in a roadside ditch while driving his tractor to a nearby field. He stopped to investigate and discovered a severely decomposed human body. The August heat, intense sun, and insect activity had accelerated decomposition, and bones were beginning to show. He immediately called law enforcement. Police at the scene could learn little from the remains, so they ordered laboratory tests and brought in specialists. Entomologists studied the insects present and determined the victim had been dead for over a month. They also concluded the victim was a young woman, about 17 to 20 years old. This wasn't enough to identify her definitively, but it did narrow the search. Reviewing local missing person reports reduced the possibilities to a few names, including 18-year-old Berit Beck. The victim showed multiple signs of strangulation on her neck. She was blindfolded, and there were no cuts or gunshot wounds. So the medical examiner determined the cause of death to be strangulation. Notably, the blindfold was a red rag. Forensic analysis confirmed the fabric matched a torn shirt found in Berit's abandoned car. Combined with dental records, this evidence positively identified the body as 18 years old, Berit Beck. When the police searching for her were notified, the case was officially reclassified as a homicide. The body was found nude except for socks, suggesting possible abuse. However, the state of decomposition made it impossible to confirm or disprove this hypothesis. No bodily fluids could be recovered. A search of the area near the body turned up some of Berit's personal items, but several pieces of jewelry were missing. Her gold ring, a gift from her boyfriend, and her wristwatch were gone. The car was also missing a radio and radar detector. It was suspected the killer took them either to sell or to mislead investigators. After a thorough examination of the car, police found the ring under the floor mat on the driver's side. The rest of the items were still missing. Investigators compiled detailed descriptions of the missing items and canvas pawn shops near where the body was found and in nearby suburbs. New leads emerged. No one recognized the items. The investigation pressed on. The geography complicated matters. The distance between the body and the abandoned van spanned tens of kilometers. Yet the van's high mileage suggested the killer drove much farther. No fingerprints were found on the steering wheel or gear shift. They had been wiped clean, indicating the killer deliberately removed traces. Other evidence left in the van might have contained the killer's DNA, but attempts to develop a profile failed. The samples were too limited for 1,990 seconds forensic methods. Eventually, the county sheriff took personal charge of the case. He was struck by the van's mileage and tried to reconstruct Berit's movements. The van was bright and outfitted with extra equipment, making it theoretically noticeable, but the model was common. Moreover, traffic camera systems were hardly common at the time, so this line of investigation reached a dead end. The killer had the van for several days, drove it extensively, yet avoided police detection. Given the calculated behavior and method of murder, investigators considered whether the killer might have known Berit. Hare's social circle, however, consisted of respectable people. Berit was intelligent, law-abiding, and had no bad habits. The last person to see her alive was her boyfriend, Curtis, so he was scrutinized, more from a lack of other leads than real suspicion. Curtis immediately maintained his innocence, cooperated fully, and took a polygraph. He was quickly cleared. He had a strong alibi, having remained in the city and at work for the days following his meeting with Berit. He could not have traveled the roughly 500 kilometers associated with her disappearance. Investigators then turned to men with criminal records living in Fond du Lac at the time. Their prime suspect became a local career criminal named Craig Rohn, known in criminal circles as Psycho for his explosive temper and poor impulse control. The erratic young man had a lengthy criminal record. Craig drew law enforcement's attention because he was known for stealing cars and committing armed robberies. While Berit wasn't physically assaulted, her car was used for an extended period. Around the time Berit drove to a work event, Craig was seen in the Fond du Lac area. In the winter of 1991, detectives searched Craig's property under a warrant, From the start, Craig was uncooperative. He denied any involvement in the car theft and Berit's death, refused to provide an alibi, and refused to take a polygraph test. Craig insisted the investigation was a setup and that he was being made a scapegoat. Still, searches of his home and car turned up no evidence linking him to the crimes. Despite this, detectives remained convinced of his guilt and focused on building a case against him. Police records show that Craig had serious behavioral problems from his teenage years, including running away from home, taking banned substances, and getting involved in the underworld. He dropped out of school, began stealing cars, and later added robberies to his offenses. Eventually, he received his first prison sentence by the 1,990 seconds. Craig had a lengthy rap sheet and multiple stints in prison. He had a reputation as a career criminal who lived off illegal activity. People close to him believed he was capable of any crime, even murder. However, he had no known history of violence against women. Investigators still considered him dangerous and suspected he could kill without remorse, so they tried to link him to Berit's disappearance. They believed the lack of evidence was due to his experience. He knew what to eliminate and how to avoid leaving traces. There were reasons for suspicion. Around the time of Berit's abduction, Craig was staying at a motel near the Fond du Lac shopping center. Still, the evidence was circumstantial, and prosecutors couldn't charge him with Berit's murder. A short time later, Craig was arrested on unrelated charges and sent to federal prison. This eased concerns about public safety while the investigation continued. A police informant, Tim Amundsen, then deepened suspicion by claiming Craig had confessed to the murder and even shown him Berit's body. According to Tim, the body was left in the stolen van for nearly a day before Craig disposed of it outside the city. Yet the longer detectives worked the case, the clearer it became. There was no solid evidence tying Craig to the crime. They decided not to prosecute him in connection with Berit's murder. That decision proved sound. Tim later recanted, admitting he had fabricated the story. Tim said he despised Craig and wanted him imprisoned long-term to prevent future harm. Tim's account was based on details from detectives and TV reports. He even failed a polygraph, confirming he was lying. Detectives then reviewed physical evidence and found 12 fingerprints on items in Berit's car. The tests showed that they did not belong to Berit or anyone close to her, and they did not match against police databases. Importantly, they did not match Craig either. Even after Craig was imprisoned on unrelated charges, investigators kept monitoring him. Despite no matching fingerprints, detectives have not given up on the theory that he killed Berit. For years, there were no leads. Only in 2013 did the 1990 case come back to life, when a new cold case team was formed. A new detective joined the team and was given the first task: to collect all of Berit Beck's documents and artifacts from the archives, digitize them, and review them. In February 2014, the investigation finally produced a breakthrough. An analyst at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab re-examined evidence from the van and discovered 9 previously unidentified fingerprints on 5 items, including a Burger King cup. In addition, police found a manual from the company where Berit was planning to work, a teeth whitening kit she had purchased at a Fond du Lac supermarket, and cigarette and candy wrappers. All were sent for analysis and compared to a database. The initial hope was slim, but then the results came. All 9 fingerprints belonged to the same person in the database: Dennis Brantner, 61, a truck driver in Kenosha. Just before Berit went missing, he repaired the stove in her family's home, thus linking him to the family and possibly to she. Detectives then reviewed his criminal history. His first arrest was in 1994 for assaulting, kidnapping, and beating his second wife. By then, many people had already noticed his volatile, manipulative behavior toward women. One co-worker even remembered Dennis saying he wanted to kidnap, abuse, and kill a woman. With this information, detectives searched his Kenosha home in 2014 with a search warrant. hoping to find missing items from Barrett's truck that the killer may have kept as trophies. Nothing from the van was found, which was not surprising given the time that had passed. However, investigators seized a computer, storage devices, a photo album, and several discs for analysis. Later that year, Dennis was brought in for questioning. He initially claimed he didn't know who Barrett was and insisted he was innocent. When informed that his fingerprints matched evidence from the van, his demeanor changed. He immediately said he hadn't killed her, suggesting he knew more than he admitted. Despite this, the first interview did not yield a confession, and he was released. His erratic behavior only deepened investigators' suspicions, but they still needed physical evidence. On March 27, 2015, Dennis was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the death of Barrett Beck, drawing national attention. Barrett's family remained skeptical. For 25 years, his name had never been mentioned as a suspect. Barrett's family knew him, believed he was harmless and unlikely to attack Barrett. They also believed the police had the wrong man. Nevertheless, the trial began in June 2016. As the trial progressed, Dennis's parents and brother became increasingly convinced that he was guilty. The prosecution relied on fingerprints, the only direct evidence, and a slew of circumstantial evidence, including the suspect's cigarettes and cigarette butts found in the abandoned truck. They also presented witness statements and accounts of the man's disturbing past behavior, suggesting a pattern of cruelty and control toward women. The defense countered that the case was weak and largely circumstantial, emphasizing omitted details, most notably that some DNA samples from the truck did not match Dennis. The defense sought to introduce a previous suspect, Craig Crone, but the judge barred any mention of him during the hearing. Barrett's family and her boyfriend, Curtis, testified emotionally about their lives since her murder. Still, after 3 weeks of testimony, the jury could not reach a verdict, and a mistrial was declared. A retrial was ordered in January 2017. At the retrial, the evidence was largely unchanged, and both sides appeared to have a viable path to victory. On his attorney's advice, Dennis pleaded guilty to negligent homicide in February 2018, though he refused to provide full details to substantiate his account. At the time, Dennis was 64. Sentencing followed state laws from the 1,990 seconds, which capped the penalty at 10 years. He received the maximum on March 1, 2018. He had already served 3 years in pretrial detention, which counted toward his sentence, and he remained eligible for parole. In the best case, he could be released around age 75. He is currently incarcerated. After the sentencing, Barrett's family spoke to the press, expressing deep dissatisfaction. They noted that the original charges could have carried more than 5 years and felt the final sentence was too lenient. They said they had hoped this dangerous predator would spend the rest of his life in prison. As it stands, Dennis could eventually regain his freedom and, in their view, pose a risk to others. Yara Gambirasio, a young woman, left the gymnastics center and began walking home, just a few hundred yards away, on the same path she took every day. But this time, she never arrived. What seemed like a simple disappearance quickly sparked a national search and became one of Italy's most haunting and famous cases. As the clues began to unravel, the story unfolded like a detective movie. But it was true. Yara Gambirasio was born on May 21, 1997, in Brembate di Sopra, a quiet town in northern Italy, not far from Bergamo. With a population of just over 7,000, it was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, known for its peaceful streets, centuries-old architecture, and scenic views of the Lombardy countryside. The Gambirasio family had lived there for generations. Yara had loving parents, an older sister, and 2 younger brothers. She was cheerful, disciplined, and passionate about gymnastics, a sport she practiced almost daily at the town's sports center, located just a short walk from her home. On the evening of November 26, 2010, 13-year-old Yara told her parents she was going to the gym briefly to return a stereo to her coach. It was around 5:15 p.m. when she said goodbye, promising she'd be back within an hour. In a town like Brembate di Sopra, there was little reason to worry. The short walk was safe, and the neighborhood was known for its calm. But as the evening grew darker and Yara didn't return, unease began to set in. By 7 p.m., she was still missing. Her mother tried calling her at 7:11 a.m., but the call went straight to voicemail. Within minutes, her parents contacted the local police. The case was quickly escalated to the provincial headquarters in Bergamo, roughly 6 miles away, where an experienced prosecutor, Letizia Ruggeri, took charge. She immediately dispatched officers to begin a full-scale search, requesting assistance from the Carabinieri, the National Military Police. After speaking with Yara's family, investigators went to the gym to retrace her steps. Her coach confirmed that Yara had stopped by around 5:30 p.m. Several of her friends also saw her that evening. She chatted briefly, practiced a few moves, and then said she was going home. The police soon discovered that at 6:44 p.m., Yara had sent a text message to a friend, her last known communication. Investigators concluded that Yara had vanished somewhere between the sports complex and her home. Search teams divided the area into sectors. Some combed the streets, others interviewed residents, and another group reviewed closed-circuit television footage. A few witnesses near the gym reported seeing a girl resembling Yara talking to 2 men near a red car. Though this lead couldn't be confirmed, police scoured the entire sports center, but found nothing. Meanwhile, Carabinieri and local officers searched the streets, fields, even the banks of a nearby river. Firefighters and hundreds of volunteers joined in, but despite the effort, there was no sign of Yara. Soon, Letizia called in canine units to assist. The search dogs picked up Yara's scent from her clothing, but instead of leading officers toward her home, the trail went in the opposite direction, toward a nearby industrial area and the small town of Mapello, about 3 miles away. Investigators requested Yara's phone data, which showed her cell connected to a tower in Mapello at 6:49 p.m., just 5 minutes after she had sent her last text. Given the short time frame, it was impossible for her to have reached that area on foot. She must have been taken there by vehicle. At this point, Yara's trail went cold. Investigators were left with 2 primary theories. The first, and most likely, was that she had been kidnapped. The second was that she had run away, though there was little evidence to support that. In her final messages, Yara had made plans with friends for the following day, something completely inconsistent with a runaway scenario. Despite their doubts, police interviewed dozens of relatives, classmates, and neighbors, but nothing pointed to family problems or personal issues. Letizia authorized phone taps on family members and several acquaintances, hoping to catch a lead. She also made a bold move, requesting the location data for every cell phone that had connected to Mapello's towers on the night of Yara's disappearance. If someone had abducted her, their phone would have left a digital trace, but identifying the right person among thousands of signals would prove to be an almost impossible task. In total, investigators received data from more than 15,000 cell phones that had connected to towers in the area on the night Yara disappeared. Every number was analyzed. A special task force was created to monitor and cross-check thousands of those lines that seemed even remotely suspicious. Meanwhile, the physical search for Yara continued relentlessly. But each passing day brought disappointment. No new clues surfaced. Prosecutor Letizia began to fear that the case might go cold, and her final hope rested on the massive trove of phone records, one of which, she believed, had to belong to the person responsible. Within days, officers had listened to thousands of hours of recorded conversations, but none appeared relevant to Yara's disappearance. Then, in late November, A curious detail surfaced. An officer reviewing one of the recordings heard a man's voice saying something deeply unsettling. "Forgive me, Lord. I didn't kill her." The words immediately raised alarms. Investigators traced the number and identified its owner as Mohammed Fikri, a Moroccan construction worker who lived in Mapello, the same town where Yara's phone had last been active. When police tried to locate Fikri, they encountered an unexpected problem. The recordings they were reviewing were delayed by several days due to the enormous volume of data. By the time Fikri's call was flagged as suspicious, he was already aboard a ship bound for Morocco. The situation looked highly incriminating. Believing they might have found Yara's kidnapper, Italian authorities ordered the ship to be intercepted in the Mediterranean. Fikri was arrested at sea and brought back to Italy under heavy guard. At the same time, investigators discovered his car and found a mattress in the trunk with visible bloodstains. Forensic teams quickly sent it to the lab for testing. But when the results came back, the case took a surprising twist. The blood was not Yara's. In fact, it wasn't even human. To make matters worse, linguistic experts reviewed the original recording and realized the officer had mistranslated Fikri's statement from Arabic. He had actually said something entirely different and harmless. After verifying his alibi and reviewing the evidence, investigators concluded that Fikri had nothing to do with Yara's disappearance. He was released soon after. By this time, Yara's case had become one of the most followed stories in Italy. National television channels covered every update. People across the country prayed for her safe return. When Fikri's arrest made headlines, many believed justice was finally within reach. But when his innocence was confirmed, the news sent a wave of disappointment and frustration through the public. Investigators were once again back at square one. With no solid leads or suspects to pursue, still, the police refused to give up. They continued to analyze phone data, review surveillance footage, and conduct searches in surrounding towns. But week after week, the investigation hit dead ends. Then, exactly 3 months after Yara vanished, everything changed. On February 26, 2011, a man from Cignolo d'Isola, a small town about 6 miles from Brembate di Sopra, went out to fly his remote-controlled airplane. When the device malfunctioned, he landed it in a field covered with tall grass to avoid damaging it. As he walked to retrieve it, he noticed what looked like a pile of old rags. At first, he thought little of it, until he saw boots sticking out from underneath. Alarmed, he called the police. Officers arrived quickly and confirmed the worst. Beneath the fabric lay a decomposed human body. The level of decay was severe, making visual identification impossible. When Letizia arrived at the scene, however, she immediately felt a chilling certainty. The clothes were unmistakable. The same outfit Yara had worn the night she disappeared. Near the body were several of her belongings: an iPod, house keys, her SIM card, and the removable battery from her phone. The phone itself, however, was gone. Italy's most respected forensic pathologist, Professor Cristina Cattaneo, conducted the autopsy. She determined that Yara had died from multiple stab wounds, including one that punctured her lungs and another to her wrist, suggesting she had tried to defend herself. There were no signs of assault, but the fact that parts of her clothing were missing indicated a possible abuse motive. Forensic experts also discovered fibers on her clothing that matched materials commonly used in textile manufacturing, hinting that her killer might work in a fabric or garment factory nearby. In addition, forensic technicians found 2 foreign DNA samples, one on Yara's gloves and another on the battery of her mobile phone. But both samples were small and partially degraded, making it impossible to obtain full genetic profiles. When compared with existing databases, no matches were found. Once again, the investigation had reached a dead end. 2 months later, Letizia received an unexpected call from the forensic laboratory. The experts had continued analyzing Yara's clothing, and this time, they found biological material on her underwear. The DNA testing produced a complete male profile, one that did not belong to anyone previously identified. With this crucial lead, Letizia divided her team into specialized units. Some officers were tasked with collecting DNA samples from all of Yara's relatives, friends, and acquaintances, as well as everyone who had been at the sports complex the evening she disappeared. Others were assigned to analyze cell tower data, compiling a list of phone numbers that had traveled from Brembate di Sopra to Mapello on the night of the disappearance, and collecting DNA from those individuals as well. The operation was massive and time-consuming. Even with 3 laboratories across Italy processing the samples, the work was painfully slow. Thousands of swabs were collected, analyzed, and compared, but none matched the DNA of the unknown killer. As weeks turned into months, the investigation seemed to be running in circles. Still, Letizia refused to give up. She kept looking for new angles, new ways to connect the dots. That's when she remembered something. Near the field, where Yara's body was discovered, stood a nightclub notorious for its rough clientele and frequent police interventions. Many regulars were known to have criminal records. Perhaps, she thought, the killer was someone familiar with that area. It was a long shot, but Letizia decided to pursue it. She ordered her officers to collect DNA samples from everyone entering the nightclub on Friday and Saturday nights, because entry required a membership card. Investigators could also access the list of past visitors and contact them for testing. A few weeks later, the call came that changed everything. The lab reported a partial DNA match between the killer's profile and a man who had visited the club. His name was Damiano Garanoni, and at first, investigators believed they had finally found their suspect. But there was a problem. Damiano had been abroad at the time of Yara's disappearance, and his alibi checked out completely. However, this new clue is not useless. Since Damiano's DNA only partially matched the killer's, it could mean only one thing. They were related by blood. Following this revelation, Letizia's team began tracing Damiano's family connections in the hope of identifying which relative could be responsible. It was a painstaking task. This was before genetic genealogy became a common investigative tool. Every step of the process had to be done manually, through old records, archives, and family interviews. Soon, they discovered something surprising. Damiano's mother had once worked as a housekeeper for Yara's family for nearly 10 years, before leaving the job a few years earlier. When police approached her, the woman was deeply shaken to learn that someone from her family might be connected to the murder of the girl she had watched grow up. But after extensive testing, none of Damiano's immediate relatives matched the killer's DNA. That meant investigators were now looking for a distant family member, someone still related to Damiano, but many generations removed. The search dragged on for months. The media began to lose patience. Headlines accused Letizia and her team of incompetence, failure. Television commentators mocked the investigation's lack of results. Even politicians demanded that she be removed from the case. But despite the criticism and relentless pressure, Letizia persisted. Her team continued to reconstruct family trees, sometimes tracing them as far back as the 18th century. They examined thousands of birth, marriage, and death records, chasing one faint lead after another. Finally, in September 2011, a new discovery emerged. The genealogical investigation led them to a man known only by his initials, Ignoto 1. He had been dead for several years, but his widow had preserved old letters and envelopes that bore his initialed stamps. Forensic experts managed to extract DNA from those traces, and the results were stunning. The analysis showed that Ignoto 1 was either the father or grandfather of the person whose DNA had been found on Yara's body. Investigators quickly located his 2 known sons and collected their DNA for comparison. Both samples showed a close genetic match, but not a complete one, meaning neither of the men was the killer. Letizia was once again at a loss. The results confirmed that the murderer was a direct descendant of this family, but none of the known male relatives fit. That left only one possibility. Ignota 1 had fathered a child outside his marriage, a child whose existence was a secret. Uncovering that secret, however, was no simple task. The alleged affair would have taken place decades earlier, and most people who might have known about it were already dead or unwilling to speak. Nevertheless, investigators began interviewing hundreds of witnesses, combing through archives, parish registries, and census documents in an attempt to piece together the hidden branch of the family tree. The truth, they hoped, it was buried somewhere in that forgotten lineage. Nearly a year later, investigators finally stumbled upon a new lead. Records revealed that since the 1960s, Ignota 1 had regularly visited a spa complex in a small town near Milan. Every May, he stayed there for 2 weeks, and no one in his family knew why. Curious about this unexplained routine, Letizia ordered the police to obtain archival records of all guests who had stayed at the spa during those years. To her surprise, the records were still preserved, meticulously kept in old handwritten ledgers. Investigators began cross-referencing every woman who stayed at the spa during the same periods as Ignota 1. The process was slow and painstaking, stretching over the course of a full year. But despite their efforts, Letizia still hadn't identified the mysterious woman who could have been Ignota 1's lover. Meanwhile, the media had caught wind of this new angle. The idea that the killer might be the illegitimate child of a secret affair captivated the entire nation. Journalists launched their own investigations, publishing endless speculation and rumors. Some reporters even began searching for individuals born out of wedlock in the 1960s and 1970s, hoping to unearth the lost child themselves. In some villages, they found multiple children born under suspicious circumstances, none of whom were connected to the case. The public fascination grew into a national obsession. And then, in 2014, 4 years after Yara's disappearance, the investigation finally took a decisive turn. That summer, Letizia's team received a tip suggesting that Ignota 1 might have had an affair with a woman named Esther Azovskaya. When the detectives checked their files, they discovered something startling. They had already collected Esther's DNA sample 2 years earlier, but the analysis at the time had concluded that she was not related to the killer. Still, something about the tip nagged at Letizia, and she ordered a new analysis of the old samples. The results left everyone stunned. The initial lab technician had made a critical error. They had accidentally compared the killer's DNA to Yara's own DNA, not to Esther's. When the correct comparison was finally made, the truth emerged. Esther Azovskaya was indeed the biological mother of the killer. This revelation finally broke the case open. Investigators learned that Esther had 3 children, including twins, a boy and a girl, whose ages matched what they believed to be the killer's profile. Officially, the twins were the children of Esther's husband, but the DNA evidence suggested otherwise. Ignota 1 is their biological father. Since the killer was male, attention quickly turned to Esther's son. At the time, he was 42 years old, married with children, and worked as a construction worker. Most strikingly, he lived in Mapello, the exact town where Yara's cell phone signal had last been detected on the night she disappeared. Letizia quickly devised a plan to obtain his DNA sample without alarming him. She devised a clever plan. Learning that he drove the same route to work every morning, she arranged for a random sobriety checkpoint along that road. When the man was stopped, he unknowingly provided his saliva sample through the breathalyzer test, which was immediately sent to the lab almost 4 years after Yara's murder. Letizia finally received the long-awaited call. The DNA was an exact match to the biological material found on Yara's underwear. The killer's identity was no longer a mystery. His name was Massimo Giuseppe Bossetti. On June 16, 2014, he was arrested and charged with murder. Bossetti firmly denied any involvement, claiming complete innocence. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a series of alarming details that pointed directly toward him. His internet search history included disturbing material involving minors. On the night Yara vanished, Bossetti's cell phone had connected to towers in Brembate di Sopra, but it was mysteriously turned off at 5:45 p.m., right around the time she left for the gym, and wasn't turned back on until the following morning. Even more damning, surveillance footage from near the sports complex showed a van matching Bossetti's driving past, shortly before Yara disappeared. The vehicle's license plates had been removed, preventing its identification at the time. But once Bossetti was arrested, police confirmed it was indeed his van. Forensic experts also found fibers from Bossetti's car seats on Yara's clothing, another powerful link between the two. During the trial, prosecutors presented additional testimony from a local witness. The woman said that on the evening of the disappearance, she had stepped outside to take out the trash when she saw a van speeding past her house. Inside, she glimpsed a young girl and heard screams coming from the vehicle. The van, she said, looked identical to Bossetti's. Investigators also learned that Bossetti frequently visited a pizza restaurant located on the same street as Yara's home, suggesting he may have seen her multiple times before the crime, and possibly planned the abduction in advance. When confronted with the evidence, Bossetti claimed that he had simply been driving home from work that evening. But investigators discovered that he had not worked that day at all. His employer confirmed his absence, and both CCTV footage and cell tower data supported the prosecution's timeline. The evidence was overwhelming. What had started as one of Italy's most confounding mysteries was finally unraveling, piece by piece. The trial formally began in the summer of 2015, nearly a year after Bossetti's arrest, and it immediately captured national attention. While many believed he was the killer, a few anticipated the dramatic twists and surprises that would unfold. The prosecution's narrative was straightforward. Bossetti had likely surveilled Yara for days or weeks, waiting for a moment to abduct her after she left the sports complex alone. He then brought her to the field where her remains would later be found and killed her. Their main hypothesis: he intended to assault her. Though some detail prevented that plan from fully playing out, surveillance cameras near the sports complex and 3 independent witnesses recorded Bossetti's car nearby. The defense insisted on Bossetti's innocence. He claimed he frequently experienced nosebleeds, which could explain traces of blood on his clothing and tools. His lawyers proposed that the actual perpetrator might have come into contact with Bossetti's blood earlier, and that contamination could account for the match found on Yara's clothing. They also attacked the DNA evidence itself, arguing that the profile belonged to a portion of DNA that changes slowly over generations and could theoretically belong to someone related to Bossetti rather than Bossetti himself. The prosecution's experts, however, countered resolutely, arguing that the DNA match was so precise and conclusive that only Bossetti could have been the source. The defense also introduced a dramatic new theory by naming a gym instructor, Silvia Brenna, as a possible alternative suspect. Blood of Silvia was allegedly found on the cuff of Yara's jacket. Silvia's father testified that she had returned home that night visibly distraught and crying. Though she offered no coherent explanation, she and her brother apparently exchanged text messages that evening, messages that were deleted almost immediately, leaving no trace of their content. In court, Silvia repeatedly said she could not recall why she was upset, what she had written to her brother, or how her blood ended up on Yara's clothing. Despite this unexpected revelation, the jury found Massimo Giuseppe Bossetti guilty. On July 1, 2016, he was given a life sentence, and subsequent appeals failed to overturn the verdict. Though Bossetti has remained imprisoned, the unresolved questions surrounding Silvia Brenna and the unexplained presence of her DNA continue to trouble those who followed the case. Some observers argue these anomalies suggest possible misconduct, improper handling of DNA evidence, or even a wrongful conviction. Still, the case remains one of the most scrutinized and controversial in modern Italian legal history. The evidence presented was reviewed by Italy's leading forensic experts, making the possibility of Bossetti's innocence unlikely in the eyes of many. On November 7, 2019, Marta Calvo Buron failed to show up for a scheduled meeting with her mother. Her phone was unreachable, and messages went unanswered. The last known trace of her was a live location she had shared from Manuel, a small town south of Valencia. At first, her disappearance seemed like a misunderstanding. Perhaps her phone had lost signal. Maybe she had decided to stay at a friend's house, or simply needed some time alone. But by the next morning, her mother's concern had turned into fear. What happened to Marta that night? Marta Calvo Buron, 25 years old, was the eldest of 3 siblings. She worked in the hospitality industry, but her real passion was in beauty, aesthetics. Together with her mother, Marisol Buron, she was planning to open a nail and beauty studio. They had already found a location, and the lease was ready to sign. It was a dream they shared, a symbol of their hard work. Hope for the future. Marta and her mother had an exceptionally close and trusting relationship. They spoke every day, exchanging calls, messages throughout the day. Marisol, a single mother raising 3 children while working as a warehouse supervisor at a supermarket, devoted her life to her family, especially Marta. She was protective but never controlling. Their bond was built on love and mutual respect. Nearby, Jorge Ignacio Palma, originally from Colombia, was living in Spain illegally. His criminal history was extensive, ranging from small-scale banned substances trafficking to involvement in large cocaine shipments, and his name was already familiar to law enforcement across several countries. Despite multiple arrests in Spain, Italy, he somehow managed to avoid deportation and continued his illicit activities. On the surface, though, he appeared calm, confident, and respectable, traits that allowed him to blend in, deflect suspicion. At first glance, Marta and Jorge seemed to exist in 2 completely different worlds. Marta was open, optimistic, and full of plans for her future, while Palma operated in the shadows, hidden from the authorities, connected to criminal networks, and accustomed to deceit. Marisol never imagined the danger lurking behind her daughter's new acquaintance. What began as a casual encounter would soon spiral into one of the most shocking crimes Spain had seen in years. Valencia, Spain's 3rd largest city, lies along the country's eastern coast, a vibrant hub of tourism, business, and culture. Beneath its bright Mediterranean charm, however, runs a darker current. Thanks to its port access and strategic highways, Valencia has long served as a major entry point for smuggling operations, including shipments of banned substances from Latin America. Beyond the city's lively plazas and sunny boulevards is a hidden underworld, a network of temporary apartments and illegal rentals where undocumented individuals can live under the radar. It was within this shadowy space that Palma, despite his illegal status, moved freely, renting homes under false identities, forming connections, and staying one step ahead of law enforcement. About 60 kilometers southwest of Valencia lies Manuel, a quiet rural town of just over 2,500 residents. With limited infrastructure, minimal police presence, and a sense of isolation, it was the kind of place where someone could vanish, or make someone else vanish, without attracting much attention. Palma specifically chose a rented house there for its remoteness, knowing it would give him privacy and time. November 7th, 2019, began like any ordinary day for Marta. That morning, she texted her mother to cancel their planned meeting, saying she had another engagement. She told her mother that she was going out of town but didn't mention any names. Marisol didn't question it. She trusted her daughter completely. At 25, Marta was independent, smart, and responsible. Although her mother felt a pang of disappointment at the last-minute change, she didn't press for details. She simply wished her daughter a good evening. Visiting Manuel wasn't unusual for Marta. She occasionally met people through dating apps and had previously met Palma that way. When he reached out again, Marta agreed to meet him, feeling comfortable and in control. On the day she disappeared, Marta boarded a train from Valencia to Manuel. From there, she took a taxi to her final destination. Ever cautious, Marta sent her mother a message containing her live location. It was something she often did, just a simple way to reassure her mother that everything was fine. That single gesture would turn out to be vital to the investigation, pinpointing her last known whereabouts, a rental property quietly secured by Palma, who had gone out of his way to avoid drawing attention. The morning of November 8, 2019, began quietly for Marisol. There was no message from her daughter, something that usually arrived like clockwork. At first, she didn't think much of it. Maybe Marta had been tired after the night out. Maybe she got home late and decided to sleep in. Still, as the hours passed and no reply came, Marisol sent another message. Again, no response. By afternoon, Marta's phone was unreachable, and her WhatsApp messages remained unread. That's when worry began to turn into fear. Marta was always careful. If there was a delay, especially while visiting somewhere unfamiliar, she would have said something. The day dragged on in anxious silence. Marisol tried to stay hopeful. Perhaps Marta's phone had died, or maybe she had just lost track of time. But as night fell and the silence deepened, denial was no longer possible. This wasn't a simple delay. Something was terribly wrong. After 24 hours with no word from her daughter, Marisol knew she couldn't wait any longer. She decided to follow the only lead she had, the geolocation Marta had sent before disappearing. It led to a specific address in the quiet town of Manuel. Determined, she went there herself. When she arrived, she knocked on the door. A man answered. It looked composed, even polite, but his eyes flickered uneasily, never meeting hers for long. That man was Palma. Marisol asked him directly if he had seen her daughter, explaining that Marta had shared this address before going missing. Palma denied everything. He claimed he didn't know anyone by that name, said no one had visited him, and insisted he'd been alone all night. His manner was polite, but there was something cold and evasive about him. He seemed anxious to end the conversation. Marisol pressed further, hoping there had been a misunderstanding. Perhaps he had seen someone who matched Marta's description, but Palma just repeated his denial. Deep down, Marisol felt this man knew something. She didn't have proof. She didn't have authority. But she had a mother's intuition, and every instinct screamed that this stranger was lying. That same day, she reached out to Marta's closest friends. She showed them the address from the message Marta had sent. One friend recalled Marta, mentioning a man she had met online, a man who lived outside the city. But she hadn't shared his name. With no new information and no one else to turn to, Marisol went straight to the Valencia police station, hoping to find help. Marisol reported Marta missing after not being able to reach her for over a day. However, the police require a 48-hour waiting period before investigating a missing person case. The officer explained that Marta was an adult and had the right to disappear. Unless there was evidence suggesting she was in danger, they couldn't investigate it as a crime. Marisol tried to explain. This wasn't like her daughter. Marta always called, always answered her messages. She never vanished without a word. Not for hours, let alone a full day. This wasn't independence. This was a warning sign. But the officer dismissed her concern. To him, there was no crime, and without that, there would be no investigation. Not even a visit to the address her daughter had sent. Marisol refused to give up. She pushed back, demanding that her report at least be formally filed. The officer reluctantly agreed, but the document he produced was bare bones, missing crucial details, such as her visit to Palma's house, his suspicious behavior, and the geolocation Marta had voluntarily shared before vanishing. No visit to the property, no phone calls, no follow-up, nothing. The police simply logged the case as a routine report and told her to wait. Marisol left the station in disbelief. Not just because her daughter was missing, but because of the indifference she had just encountered. The system that was supposed to protect her had turned its back when it mattered most. Realizing that waiting could only make things worse, Marisol decided to act on her own. While continuing to pressure the authorities, she filed multiple reports with different departments, called daily for updates, and insisted the case be treated as urgent. But the response never changed. Bureaucracy held firm. Without concrete evidence that Marta's disappearance involved violence or foul play, her case remained a low priority. Days slipped by. Marta's phone stayed off. Her messages remained unread. And while the police hesitated, Palma had exactly what he needed. Time. Time to erase traces. Time to plan his next move. Eventually, under mounting public pressure, and thanks to Marisol's persistence, the case was transferred to Spain's Guardia Civil, the national law enforcement agency. The new team immediately changed course. They began a full investigation, starting with the location Marta had sent before disappearing and retracing her final steps. Agents went to the property in Manuel, the same address tied to Palma. Even from the outside, the house gave off an eerie sense of concealment. The shutters were closed tight, curtains drawn, no sign of life within. When officers knocked and asked to enter, Palma refused, citing his legal rights. The standoff caused delays, but with a formal complaint on record and probable cause established, investigators obtained a search warrant. What they found inside was deeply unsettling. The kitchen and bathroom reeked of disinfectant. Every surface had been scrubbed. Tiles gleamed unnaturally clean. In one room, they discovered women's clothing, items that could have belonged to Marta. Outside, the trash bin contained paper towels marked with suspicious stains. Investigators collected everything: fabric fragments, hair strands, and biological residue. On one wall, faint reddish smears, possibly blood, became visible under specialized lighting. Every trace was carefully photographed and sealed for forensic testing. At the same time, the Guardia Civil's cyber and telecom units began tracing Marta's digital trail. Cell tower data confirmed what Marisol had feared. Marta's phone lost signal just meters from Palma's residence, the exact spot she had pinned for her mother on the evening of November 7th, 2019. Then, nothing. The pattern was undeniable. Marta had reached Palma's house and she had never left. With mounting evidence, the authorities officially reclassified the case. Marta Calvo Buron was no longer just missing. She was presumed the victim of a violent crime. Palma's behavior only deepened suspicion. His statements were contradictory, his timeline incoherent, and his alibi full of holes. He appeared tense, evasive, and manipulative. The investigation escalated swiftly. Forensic teams, crime scene specialists, DNA experts were deployed. What had begun as a missing person inquiry had now turned into a major homicide investigation, centered on Palma, and the chilling possibility that Marta's final moments had taken place within those freshly scrubbed walls. As suspicion tightened around him, Palma disappeared. His house in Manuel, Valencia, remained an active crime scene, but he was nowhere to be found. Investigators learned that shortly after his initial questioning, Palma had quietly left the property. He stopped answering calls, cut off communication with acquaintances, and avoided all familiar places. For almost a month, there was no trace of him. None of the addresses he had previously used showed any sign of life. Friends, neighbors, and former contacts hadn't seen or heard from him. Authorities were convinced he was deliberately hiding, doing everything possible to avoid being captured as the investigation closed in. Then, on December 4, 2019, something completely unexpected happened. Jorge Ignacio Palma walked voluntarily into a Guardia Civil station. After weeks in hiding, his sudden reappearance baffled investigators, and what he said next stunned them even more. He claimed he wanted to confess, During questioning, Palma offered his own version of events. According to him, Marta Calvo had died of an accidental overdose while the two were together at his home. He stated they had both consumed illegal substances voluntarily and that her death was sudden, without any signs of violence. He said, overcome with panic, he didn't know how to react and decided to dispose of her body. Palma told investigators he had dismembered Marta's body in the bathroom, using whatever tools he could find. Before disposing of the remains in trash, containers scattered across different towns in Valencia, he insisted he acted out of fear and shock, claiming he never meant to harm her, admitting only to concealing the body, not causing her death. From the very beginning, investigators doubted his story. His explanation lacked credibility. His behavior after the incident, destroying evidence, fleeing, and refusing to cooperate, didn't match that of a man overcome by panic after a tragic accident. On the contrary, the calculated manner in which he hid the body suggested preparation, consistency, and method, clear signs of intent rather than impulse. Forensic experts also questioned the plausibility of an overdose without visible symptoms. Moreover, without a body to examine, a full autopsy was impossible, creating the greatest obstacle to uncovering the truth, leaving Palma's version entirely unverified. Digging deeper into Palma's background, investigators uncovered his long criminal record, his history of banned substances trafficking, and prior suspicions of violent behavior, all of which further eroded his credibility. His so-called confession didn't close the case. Instead, it triggered a much broader and more intense investigation into his involvement in Marta Calvo Barón's death. When Palma's photograph was made public, it unleashed a wave of new testimonies. Women who had never linked themselves to Marta's case began contacting the police. One of the first was a woman named Arlene. After seeing Palma's face on television, she decided to speak out. She described a terrifying encounter after meeting him through an escort website. Palma had brought cocaine, pressured her into taking it at his home, and then attacked her. Despite her resistance and even her unconsciousness, he showed no concern for her condition and later dropped her off as if nothing had happened. After the first woman came forward, others followed. Several more victims reported similar experiences to the Guardia Civil. Though the details varied, the similarities were striking. Palma followed a disturbing pattern, targeting women, arranging meetings at his residence, pressuring them to use banned substances, and then acting with violence. In nearly every encounter, the women's safety and lives were placed in serious danger. These statements were crucial in broadening the accusations against Palma. They indicated that he intentionally chose his victims and repeatedly used the same methods. The investigation into Marta's disappearance uncovered two previously unrelated deaths, both now suspected to be linked to Palma. Arlene Ramos, 32, a Brazilian woman, died in a hospital after a man dropped her off and quickly left. While her death was initially thought to be a cocaine overdose, her medical records showed injuries that didn't match an accidental overdose. Security footage and vehicle records later confirmed that Palma was the man who left her at the hospital. Marcela Vargas, 26, a Colombian national, was found dead in a rented apartment. An autopsy revealed banned substances in her system and evidence of physical violence. Phone records later showed Palma was the last person she contacted before her death. Both women had worked as escorts. These two deaths happened before Marta disappeared. But at the time, police didn't realize there was a connection. It was only after Marta's case received widespread media coverage that the similarities became apparent. What initially seemed like unrelated incidents were now recognized as a disturbing pattern. For many years, Palma has followed a certain pattern. He targeted women, especially those advertising escort services online. In each instance, Palma allegedly gave the women cocaine in capsules. These capsules were meant to be inserted internally, which caused a fast and extremely strong reaction. This often resulted in the women becoming unconscious or losing control, Medical reports, including those from Arlene Ramos's case, showed that the women had dangerously high and potentially fatal levels of cocaine in their bodies. Even for people who regularly use the banned substances, this indicated a deliberate and methodical approach. Authorities believe Palma followed a calculated system, not acting on impulse. He appeared to have developed a low-risk strategy for overpowering his victims, repeating the same behaviors without adapting to individual situations, confident in its effectiveness. The trial of Jorge Ignacio Palma, started in 2022, immediately became a major national news story. The courtroom was packed with media, including live broadcasters and many reporters. Public interest groups were also closely watching the proceedings, creating a tense atmosphere. However, the most impactful parts of the trial were the testimonies of the survivors and Marta's mother, Marisol. Survivors, many of whom had never shared their experiences publicly, gave detailed accounts. These accounts highlighted Palma's detached and unemotional behavior and his lack of compassion. Although the events happened at different times and places, the survivors' stories were remarkably similar. Marisol delivered a powerful testimony. The courtroom was silent as she spoke, her voice steady, her grief unmistakable. She didn't ask for revenge, but demanded truth and justice. Prosecutors referred to her statement as a central piece of the case, giving emotional weight to the hard evidence. Palma's defense was contradictory. He admitted to meeting Marta and using substances with her, but insisted her death was the result of an accidental overdose. Regarding the other cases, he claimed all encounters were consensual, and the outcomes tragic but unintended. His legal team tried to portray him as cooperative, but the evidence painted a different picture. The prosecution brought forward multiple charges. Each accusation was supported by documentation, forensic reports, message logs, geolocation data, and witness testimonies. The case revealed an undeniable truth. Jorge Ignacio Palma was not a man who had made a single mistake. He was a man who had caused harm systematically. Over time, prosecutors argued that this made him a continuous threat to society and fully justified their request for the maximum possible sentence. Throughout the proceedings, Palma tried to portray himself as a man trapped by circumstance, overwhelmed, broken, and filled with regret. His emotional displays, especially when the name of Marta Calvo Buron was mentioned, seemed calculated, as if performed by someone playing a role rather than expressing genuine emotion. Palma denied all charges. He insisted he never meant to cause harm, that he was under the influence at the time. His story wasn't built on truth but on an attempt to manipulate public perception. Psychologists called to evaluate him reported signs of narcissism, manipulation, and a complete absence of empathy. At one point, he even shifted blame onto the victims, claiming that everything had been consensual, an assertion completely disproved by testimonies and forensic evidence. Experts described Palma as a man of contradictions. Outwardly, he appeared polished, polite, and confident, someone easy to trust. Each encounter was premeditated. He carefully selected his victims, targeting women in vulnerable situations. In May 2022, Jorge Ignacio Palma was found guilty on all counts, including the murders of Marta Calvo Buron, Arlene Ramos, Marcela Vargas, as well as the assaults of several other women. He was sentenced to 159 years in prison for multiple crimes, including murder, violent abuse, and offenses related to banned substances use and distribution. The court determined that Palma had acted deliberately, was fully aware of the potentially lethal consequences of his actions. Significant compensation was ordered for the victims and their families, including 640,000 euros awarded to Marta Calvo Buron's mother, Marisol, for emotional, psychological suffering. The court considered Palma's denial of responsibility, his blaming of the victims, and his complete lack of remorse as factors that worsened his crimes. These significantly increased his sentence, even when victims' bodies were missing or there were no eyewitnesses. Then, Instead of wallowing in grief, Marisol transformed her pain into a meaningful purpose. She established an organization in memory of her daughter, Marta, to help families impacted by violence and to push for changes in the system. Now, Marta's name represents not only loss, but also strength, defiance, and the pursuit of justice. Marcela Vargas's murder left her children orphaned and unable to properly mourn her. Their lives were shattered. They lost their mother, their normal routines, and their sense of security. While relatives took them in, nothing could truly replace their mother's love. Government support is scarce. Moral support is almost non-existent. Some were too young to grasp what had happened, while others would forever be scarred by that fateful night. Their sorrow was intensified by constant court appearances, interviews, and media attention. These families didn't just lose loved ones. They were pulled into the eye of a tragedy that left lasting scars, especially on the children forced to grow up too soon, forever marked by Palma's crimes. Even though Jorge Ignacio Palma admitted to dismembering Marta and hiding her body, she has never been found. Police searched extensively, including going through trash and landfills, but found nothing. The most devastating aspect for her is that Marta's body was never recovered. The lack of a place to mourn Marta continues to deeply affect Marisol, leaving her with a grief that time cannot mend and preventing her from finding peace. Marisol Bond continues her fight to bring her daughter home, even if only to give her a proper burial. For her, it's not just about closure, it's about restoring a sense of dignity, of final justice. Police have confirmed the investigation remains open and search efforts are ongoing, offering a small but vital glimmer of hope that Marta might still be found. In Anchorage, Alaska, on the night of January 6, 1978, a 16-year-old girl left home and told her mother she was going ice skating with friends. That was just an innocent lie of youth, and also the last words her family ever heard. Her name was Shelley Connolly, a young woman who dreamed of becoming a cosmetologist with a bright future ahead of her. But just hours later, that life was cut short by a brutal act of violence. The next morning, Shelley's body was found at Beluga Point, thrown down a frigid cliff. Her clothes were torn, her body covered in bruises. She had crawled back up the cliff, fighting to stay alive, and then collapsed silently into the icy cold. The haunting question is, who dragged an innocent young woman into that deadly night? Who beat Marisol, tortured, and abandoned her in the Alaskan darkness? And why did justice go unpunished for more than 4 decades? Until a new genetic technique gave the Connolly family hope. In 1978, 16 years old, Shelley Connolly lived in Anchorage, Alaska. She lived a typical teenage life, going to school, meeting friends, attending parties. Besides, she pursued her dream of becoming a cosmetologist. She knew she needed a degree, so she planned to finish high school and then attend medical school. To stay independent and fund her goals, she studied hard and worked part-time. She also loved hairstyling and had completed a hairdressing course, which brought in extra income. January 6, 1978, began like any other day. Shelley went to school in the morning and, after returning home, told her mother she was going ice skating with friends. That was a lie. Instead, that evening she went to a bustling bar in Anchorage, popular with locals and visitors. Although the security guard was not allowed to let anyone under the age of 16 in, Shelley was a regular and was allowed in. Many other teenagers also frequented the bar in the late 1970 seconds. Shelley's older sister was also at the bar with her boyfriend and saw Shelley that night. At the bar, Shelley met a group of 3 young men who looked strange and did not seem to be local. They stayed late, leaving around 2:00 a.m. A security guard, as well as Shelley's sister and her boyfriend, saw the group get into a small dark sedan Shelley's sister tried to stop her from going with those men, but she refused. When the sister returned home later, Shelley wasn't home. She chose not to worry immediately, assuming Shelley would come back soon, and went to bed. By morning, their parents were already trying to locate her. They called friends and acquaintances, but no one had seen Shelley since the previous night. By midday, the family reported her missing to the police. The older sister told officers Shelley had been at the bar and described the 3 men who she suspected were oil pipeline workers and not locals. Police began searching for suspicious young men among shift workers and recent arrivals. They also looked into men recently released from prison who had returned to Anchorage. Neither lead produced results. Because a minor had disappeared under troubling circumstances, police moved quickly, canvassing the area and interviewing bar staff. After a day, the investigation had stalled. They had only descriptions of the men and no solid leads. The next morning, tourists stopped near the railroad tracks at Beluga Point to take photos. From the edge of a rocky ledge, one of them spotted what looked like a human body down a steep slope. They called authorities immediately. Police arrived and found a girl's body about 15 meters down the rocks. Her sleeveless blouse was pushed up to her neck, and her body was covered in abrasions and bruises. She looked very young, likely a minor, and had no identification on her. Evidence suggested she had been violently assaulted over a period of time. Investigators believed she was beaten, dragged along asphalt behind a vehicle, and then thrown down the embankment, likely while the car was still moving, as there were no tire marks indicating braking. The location where she had been dumped was identified, based on the position of the victim's body on the slope. It can be seen that she continued to fight for her life after falling down there. She was still alive and conscious, as shown by marks in the rocks. She had tried to crawl upward, but her legs were broken from the fall from the car. The prolonged beating left her so exhausted she couldn't stand. The initial autopsy revealed that the injuries were not immediately fatal. However, it was January in Alaska, and the weather was extremely cold. The victim was wearing only a thin, sleeveless blouse and jeans, so it was possible that she died from hypothermia. A definitive conclusion was reached only after the autopsy was completed. The lab later determined that the brutality of the attack was more severe than initially thought. The victim suffered severe injuries that led to life-threatening internal bleeding. In addition to the injuries, the victim also engaged in intimate behavior immediately before death, possibly voluntary. She had been beaten with a blunt object, resulting in multiple lacerations, severe abrasions, and bruises. She suffered a ruptured liver from blunt force trauma to the abdomen. The autopsy listed the cause of death as internal bleeding and hypothermia. Defensive wounds and skin particles under her fingernails indicated a prolonged struggle. The assailant likely sustained injuries. Police began searching for a violent man with injuries to his hands and face. In addition to the suspect's DNA, bodily fluids were collected from under the victim's fingernails, showing signs of abuse. This evidence would have been valuable, but in 1978, DNA analysis and profiling techniques were not yet developed. Fortunately, the medical examiner preserved and archived the samples. The immediate priority was to identify the victim. Anchorage police held a press conference and, along with local television, announced the discovery of a young girl who had been abused and murdered. The brutality of the crime, possibly involving torture, sparked public outrage. Migrant workers were again blamed by some for rising crime. Shelley's family did not see the announcement immediately, but later heard that an unidentified victim had been found a few miles from Anchorage. Her parents contacted authorities and, based on the clothing description, suspected it was Shelley. Family members then confirmed the victim was 16-year-old Shelley Connolly. A homicide investigation began. Notably, this occurred while a serial killer, later identified as Robert Hansen, was targeting women in and around Anchorage. 7 more bodies were found that same year. Initially, police suspected Shelley was a victim of serial killer Robert Hansen. However, Detectives quickly realized that the circumstances of Shelley's death did not match his pattern or victim profile. When Robert was eventually caught, his DNA and even his blood type did not match the evidence in Shelley's case. With numerous assaults and murders in the area, Anchorage police were overwhelmed and lacked resources. So Shelley's case received limited attention. Detectives found no solid leads. The weapons used to restrain and beat her were never recovered, leaving no fingerprints. Witnesses couldn't reliably describe everyone who had been with Shelley during her final hours. Many bar patrons were heavily intoxicated, and their accounts conflicted, weakening their credibility. Even so, the investigation continued. After interviewing witnesses and reviewing the bar's usual patrons, one name kept coming up. A man known in the criminal underworld as Pinky. He lived near Anchorage, and multiple witnesses identified him. A background check showed he'd been on law enforcement's radar since his teens. With a growing list of offenses, his crimes escalated over time. By the period near Shelley's death, he had committed several violent assaults and was distributing banned substances. Detectives couldn't immediately name a prime suspect. Pinky seemed to vanish, which only heightened suspicion. Reports suggest that Pinky went into hiding after the abuse and murder. However, the case did not become a national manhunt because the police found him within 48 hours. He was taken to the police station for questioning, denied all charges, and provided an alibi, which was later proven true. Police then appealed to the public again, sharing all available details and asking witnesses to come forward. Several did. Despite the new tips, none led anywhere. The case stalled. Between 1978 and 1997, detectives made multiple attempts to solve Shelley Connolly's murder. They identified various suspects, but each denied guilt and produced alibis. There wasn't enough evidence to file charges. Suspect lists grew, but new arrests followed. Lacking convincing evidence, the investigation needed a new direction. By 1997, they re-examined the case with fresh eyes. At that time, DNA testing made major strides, and a specialized profiling lab opened in Alaska. Evidence from the Shelley Connolly case was sent for analysis, and a DNA profile of the perpetrator was developed. Her family hoped they would finally learn who killed their daughter. The profile was checked against the criminal database, but no match appeared. Unsurprising, since the database was still in its early stages and samples were limited. Despite repeated re-examinations, no match was found. In 2003, there was renewed hope with the full rollout of the CODIS combined DNA system. Investigators expected a breakthrough, but again, no matches. Detectives asked, could someone who could commit such a brutal crime not commit similar crimes for decades? Over the next 15 years, Shelley's case was re-examined several times, each ending in a dead end. It wasn't until 2018, when a new cold case team was formed, that the investigation took a turn. A young, promising investigator noticed an innovative method he'd heard about in a report: forensic genetic genealogy. The method, highlighted by breakthroughs from Parabon, had already helped solve dozens of long cold cases. The investigator proposed sending the unknown offender's DNA from the Shelley Connolly case to a lab. Using this approach, although the method was not widely known and skepticism remained after nearly 40 years of failure, Anchorage police leadership approved the plan. While a complete DNA profile couldn't be built from scratch, the lab obtained enough genetic information to find a close match. They identified a partial match to a woman in Florida, likely the suspect's cousin or second cousin. When contacted, she agreed to provide a DNA sample for more precise analysis. The match was confirmed, and a genealogist began building the suspect's family tree. This work traced the lineage back to a shared ancestor, a great-great-grandfather born in Pennsylvania. Identifying this common ancestor was a major breakthrough. The man in question was John McQuaid. John had 9 children, 6 daughters and 3 sons. Investigators focused on the sons, who were in their 22nd and 32nd at the time of Shelley's murder. The McQuaid brothers were known to be close but quarrelsome. They drank heavily, spent most of their free time together, and often went to bars. Since they were siblings, any of them could have been the owners of the skin and body fluids collected from Shelley's body. Detectives wanted to interview each brother individually. Tracking them down was difficult, as they had moved multiple times since the late 1972, separated, and later reunited. As the search continued, investigators dug into the McQuaid family's history. They learned that the middle brother, Donald, had moved from the settlement to Anchorage with his mother in 1971. He dropped out of school and worked as a laborer, taking whatever odd jobs he could find. Without an education, his options were limited. Over time, he slipped into crime, primarily focusing on distributing illegal goods. From a young age, he had several encounters with the law. What began as a long stretch of rebellion ended with convictions for burglary and carrying a weapon, sending him to prison. By 1978, Donald was out on parole and still on probation. About 6 months before Shelley was attacked, he shared a rented apartment in Anchorage with friends, and witnesses said he was trying to turn his life around. In prison, Donald earned his diploma and began planning for a better future. Education, a steady career, and a family. He claimed he wanted to leave crime behind. Notably, a few weeks after Shelley's murder, he reported to his parole officer, as required, and asked for permission to move to another city. Today, that request might look like an attempt to distance himself from the crime scene. In 1978, however, it raised no alarm. He was approved to relocate and left without issue. Later, when Anchorage police obtained a photo of the prime suspect from the late 1972, detectives immediately noticed he resembled one of the men seen with Shelley on the night she died. That link had been missed during the original investigation. The more detectives learned about Donald, the more suspicious he seemed. Still, only DNA could confirm or rule him out. Investigators needed a sample, and the trail led them to a suburb of Portland, Oregon, where the McQuaid brothers were living. Donald is confirmed to be living with his brother Richard. Anchorage investigators asked Portland police to collect DNA from both men. Richard remained a person of interest, though Donald was the more likely match. The third brother was quickly eliminated. He was in prison when Shelley was attacked. Police aimed to obtain DNA from one or both of the remaining brothers. Local officers found Donald easily. Within an hour of surveillance, they saw him smoke a cigarette and toss it outside. They retrieved it and sent it for testing. The results showed that the DNA matched 100%, with the DNA found under Shelley's fingernails, definitively identifying the culprit. On August 29, 2019, a cold case investigator contacted Donald in Oregon. The first question concerns the death of a young woman. Donald denied knowing her and said he didn't understand who they meant. When he realized they were asking about a deceased teenager named Shelley Connolly, he continued to insist he had never met her and knew nothing about her death. By then, detectives already knew that after the murder and his relocation, Donald had lived with a roommate in a city dormitory. Investigators contacted a neighbor to learn more about Donald's life during that period. The neighbor described him as withdrawn and uncommunicative, prone to losing control when drinking and behaving foolishly while intoxicated. The neighbor never heard Donald confess to the murder, but investigators believe they still have enough evidence to charge him. On August 30, 2019, Oregon police arrested Donald, the prime suspect. They relied on witness statements, including several men who identified Donald as the person who left the bar with Shelley the night she died. Police then contacted Shelley's mother, Judy. For 41 years, Judy regularly visited the Anchorage police station, hoping to hear that the killer had been caught. By 2019, she had nearly lost hope. When told that Donald had been arrested, she was skeptical, assuming he was just another unlikely suspect. However, once she learned how strong the evidence was, She felt relief mixed with grief. She wanted justice for her daughter. The investigation wasn't finished. During interrogation, Donald changed his story as soon as he was confronted with the evidence. Now, he claims that he may have been intimate with Shelley in 1978. He said he often got drunk in bars and met random women. Shelley could have been one of them. It was possible, he said, that they had a brief encounter and parted ways, and he simply didn't remember. He continued to deny involvement in the murder, saying he might have forgotten the encounter because he couldn't remember all the women he met during that period. Donald's brother, Richard, spoke to police and said he did not believe Donald could have killed Shelley. Although Donald had some run-ins with the law when he was younger, Richard said he had never seen him act cruelly toward women. He acknowledged, however, that Donald had problems with alcohol and behavior. While investigators continue to speak with Donald's family, he has been extradited to Alaska and is being held in the Anchorage jail. He was granted the option of a $1 million bail, with the additional requirement that a third-party custodian supervise him if he posted bond before trial. The family couldn't afford the bail, so Donald remained in custody. Bureaucratic complications followed. The defense asked the court to lower his bail and allow him to return to Oregon. With weekly telephone check-ins, Shelley's mother said the request was unreasonable, given the seriousness of the charges, and believed Donald deserved to be imprisoned. The bail amount was not eliminated. After reviewing the requests, the judge concluded that Donald did not pose a danger to the Oregon community due to his health, but remained a significant flight risk. The defense's proposed $2,500 bail was deemed too low. The judge set it at $10,000 instead. Additionally, Donald had to waive extradition, buy his own round-trip plane ticket to Oregon, and wear an ankle monitor until the hearing. During the trial, which lasted only 2 weeks, the prosecution convincingly proved Donald's guilt. He was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Shelley Connolly. The defense asked for a 20-year sentence, while the prosecutor pushed for the maximum allowed under 1972 law. In the end, 60 years old Donald McQuaid received a 50-year sentence, effectively a life term given his age and health. The verdict brought comfort to Shelley's loved ones, although her mother died before the verdict. Still, many questions remain. What was the motive? Donald probably didn't even know Shelley. Investigators also never identified 2 other men who were with her at the bar that evening and left with her. On April 19, 1991, a small, quiet neighborhood in Croydon, Pennsylvania, was shattered by a devastating fire. When the smoke cleared, firefighters found the remains of Joy Hibbs, a beloved mother, wife, and friend known for her kindness and devotion to helping others. What appeared at first to be a household tragedy would soon reveal a sinister truth. Joy had been murdered, and the fire was meant to hide it. Her case would remain unsolved for more than 30 years, buried under lies, corruption, and silence. Joy Hibbs was born on September 23, 1955, in the small town of Chiefland, Florida. She was the youngest of 9 children in a close-knit family. Joy loved the outdoors. She enjoyed hiking, fishing, and anything that connected her with nature. She was also athletic. During her school years, she took up running and even competed in local marathons. A huge football fan, she rarely missed watching her favorite team play. While in high school, Joy met a young man named Charlie Hibbs. The two quickly fell in love, and shortly after graduation, they got married. They eventually decided to move north to Croydon, Pennsylvania, a quiet suburban town known for its friendly community and tree-lined streets. Joy had always dreamed of working in the medical field, although she didn't have a formal degree at first. She started out as a veterinary assistant, then later enrolled in courses at a local college to pursue a professional certification. Her hard work paid off when she landed a job as a physical therapist at a small clinic near her home. a position that allowed her to do what she loved most, helping others. By 1975, Joy and Charlie welcomed their first child, a daughter, Angie. 3 years later, their son David was born. The family moved into a cozy home in a peaceful neighborhood, where they built what seemed like the perfect suburban life, the picture of the American dream. But everything changed on April 19, 1991. That morning, 35-year-old Joy was scheduled to work the evening shift. She helped her kids get ready for school, said goodbye to her husband as he left for work, and began preparing for her day. She also ran a few errands, stopping by the grocery store and the bank to cash a check. Around 1 p.m., her 12-year-old son David returned home from school and noticed his mother's car parked in the driveway. Excited to show her the good grades he'd received, he ran toward the house. But as he got closer, he saw thick smoke billowing from the windows. At first, he thought maybe his mom had left something on the stove. But when he opened the door, flames were already spreading across the rooms. Panicked, David tried to run inside to find his mother, but the smoke and heat were overwhelming. Neighbors saw the smoke and called the fire department. Within minutes, firefighters arrived and managed to extinguish the flames. But when they reached the last room in the house, they made a heartbreaking discovery: a body. When paramedics and police arrived, they suspected it was Joy, but the burns were so severe that they couldn't make a positive identification right away. The remains were sent to the medical examiner's office for confirmation. News of the fire spread rapidly through the small town. Joy's daughter, who was still in school at the time, heard the news and rushed home, finding her brother crying on the side of the road. A short time later, Charlie arrived at the scene. When officers told him that a body had been found inside, he collapsed on the spot. While firefighters were still investigating the cause of the blaze, David couldn't stop blaming himself. He had a computer in his room, and all the cables were plugged into a single outlet near his fish tank. Since his mother's body was discovered in that room, he assumed the fire had started because of his messy wiring, that his mom had died trying to put it out. But as investigators examined the house, they began noticing strange and troubling details. The fire didn't seem to have started in just one place. It had multiple points of origin. Upon closer inspection, they identified 4 separate ignition spots throughout the home. That alone ruled out any possibility of an accidental fire. It was arson, and that wasn't all. All 4 gas burners on the kitchen stove had been turned on, and there were traces of accelerant spread across the surfaces. This suggested that the arsonist had deliberately used a flammable substance to spread the fire from the kitchen to the rest of the house. An intentional act meant to destroy evidence and cover up something far more sinister. The arson theory was soon confirmed by the medical examiner's report. The victim was officially identified as Joy Hibbs, and the findings revealed a grim truth. There was no smoke in her lungs, meaning she had already died before the fire began. But the most horrifying detail came from the condition of her body: multiple bruises, cuts, and stab wounds. With that discovery, the case shifted from a tragic house fire to a full-blown homicide investigation. However, uncovering evidence would prove to be a major challenge. The fire had destroyed most of the house, leaving investigators with almost nothing to work with. Even worse, no foreign DNA was found on Joy's body. With physical evidence scarce, detectives turned their attention to finding potential suspects. The first person they examined was Joy's husband, Charlie. He was reportedly at work when the fire started, but detectives couldn't completely rule him out. The theory was that he might have committed the crime and then returned to work to establish an alibi. Still, there was no indication of marital conflict, no financial troubles, no history of abuse. Friends and family all described their marriage as loving, stable, and Charlie appeared genuinely heartbroken over Joy's death. Though police continued to investigate him for a time, they eventually began looking elsewhere. Detectives then questioned Joy's friends and co-workers, hoping to uncover any personal conflicts or grudges. but everyone painted the same picture. Joy was gentle, kind, and well-liked, someone who never quarreled with anyone. When police examined the scene, her wallet, found on the couch, was empty, and her purse had been dumped out on the kitchen floor, as if someone had been searching for something specific. That led police to theorize that the killer may have followed her home or broken into the house to rob her. But this idea didn't hold up for long. Other valuable items in the house were untouched, suggesting robbery wasn't the motive. Instead, detectives began to offer a much colder explanation, that this was a deliberate and targeted attack. That theory gained weight as Joy's family revealed a series of disturbing incidents that had occurred in the months leading up to her death. Someone had once thrown a brick through their window. Another time, the front door was damaged. The tires on Joy's car had also been slashed while parked right outside the house. Back then, Joy and Charlie had dismissed these as random acts of vandalism. But now, in light of her murder, everything seemed connected. Investigators began questioning neighbors to see if anyone had witnessed anything suspicious. Several neighbors reported something peculiar on the day of the fire. A blue Monte Carlo had been spotted parked in front of Joy's house not long before the blaze started. Unfortunately, no one managed to get a good look at the driver or the license plate. When detectives mentioned the car to Joy's family, they got their first promising lead. Joy's son remembered that one of his mom's friends, a woman named April, sometimes drove a car that matched that description. Looking into it further, police discovered that April and her husband, Robert Atkins, had lived just a few houses down from the Hibbs family before recently moving away after financial troubles. Joy and April had become friends, not long after April's family moved into the neighborhood, but there was a darker side to April's story. Neighbors described her husband, Robert, as a short-tempered man with a history of violence. Rumors circulated that he had been physically abusive toward his wife. Because of this, April often sought refuge at Joy's house with her children whenever she felt unsafe at home. According to Joy's son, there had even been tension between his mother and Robert. He recalled overhearing a heated phone call where Robert shouted at Joy and threatened her directly. When police dug into Robert's background, what they found only deepened their suspicions. He had a lengthy criminal record, mostly involving banned substances-related offenses. Considering his violent behavior and possible motive, detectives began to see him as a serious suspect, a man who may have resented Joy for helping his wife and, in a fit of rage, decided to take her life. Police reached out to the Narcotics Division, which had dealt with Robert numerous times in the past, hoping to gain more insight into his background. Officers there agreed to assist and even offered to speak with him, since they already knew him from previous cases. When questioned, however, Robert firmly denied any involvement in the crime. He claimed he had been out of town for the entire weekend on vacation with his wife and children. But since Joy's murder occurred on a Friday afternoon, detectives realized it was entirely possible that Robert could have stopped by her house before leaving town. One detail in particular caught their attention: a fresh scratch on Robert's arm, which officers noticed during their conversation. Despite this, Robert maintained his innocence and refused to elaborate. In the days that followed, Robert completely stopped cooperating with investigators, saying he was acting on his lawyer's advice. When detectives asked him to take a polygraph test, he refused and avoided all further contact with police. With no confession and no cooperation, investigators focused on finding any physical evidence that could tie him to the crime. Since the house itself had yielded almost nothing, detectives returned to the neighbors who had reported seeing a blue car parked outside Joy's home on the day of the fire. They took several witnesses to Robert's residence, hoping someone could identify his vehicle. Unfortunately, that lead fell apart quickly. Robert's Monte Carlo wasn't blue. It was black. The neighbors were certain the car they had seen outside Joy's home was a different color, and therefore, likely not his. Investigators also verified Robert's alibi and confirmed that he and his family had indeed checked into a hotel in another city later that same Friday. In addition, records showed that just before leaving home, Robert had been on the phone with one of his wife's friends, a call that took place around the same time Joy was believed to have been killed. With this information, detectives began to doubt their initial suspicions and eventually decided to look elsewhere for answers. Their attention soon turned back to Joy's husband, Charlie. When investigators re-interviewed Joy's co-workers, they uncovered a new and unsettling detail. Joy had been receiving threatening phone calls in the weeks before her death. One co-worker even suspected that the caller might have been her husband, though she never confronted him about it. Over the next several months, Charlie was brought in for multiple polygraph tests and countless interviews. Yet nothing in his behavior or responses indicated guilt. Eventually, investigators concluded that his involvement was unlikely. After that, the investigation hit a wall. With no clear suspects and no physical evidence to move forward with, Joy's case went cold. For years, occasional attempts were made to revisit the file, but each effort ended in the same frustration: a dead end. By then, Joy's children had grown up, but the unresolved murder continued to haunt them. Her son, in particular, never stopped pressing for answers. He repeatedly contacted the police, urging them to reopen the case. But every time, his hopes were crushed. Then, in 2014, 23 years after the murder, the case was finally reopened. It was transferred to the cold case unit, where a new team of detectives began reviewing everything from the beginning. It didn't take long before they spotted something strange. Much of the earlier communication with Robert, one of the original prime suspects, had been handled by the narcotics division. That was not only irregular but highly unprofessional. Given that this was a murder case, the new team struggled to understand why an unrelated department had been so deeply involved. To get answers, they reached out to one of the original investigators from 1991. At first, the retired detective refused to talk, but after multiple requests, he finally agreed to speak, and what he revealed left them stunned. He admitted that from the very beginning, Robert had always seemed like the most likely suspect. However, there was one major problem. Investigators at the time had essentially been told to stay away from Robert, to stop pursuing any link between him and Joy's murder. The reason was shocking. Robert was a confidential informant for the narcotics division. As it turned out, Robert wasn't just any informant. He was the key source in a massive, years-long narcotics operation targeting a major banned substances trafficking network. The police department didn't want to risk jeopardizing that case, so they effectively protected him. As a result, the original detectives only conducted a superficial investigation into Robert's potential involvement in Joy's death. These revelations marked a turning point in the case. The new cold case team decided to rebuild the investigation from the ground up, this time without any restrictions. In 1991, police had concluded that Robert had a strong alibi, but the new detectives weren't willing to take that at face value. They started by tracking down Robert's friend, the woman he had allegedly called around the time of the murder. She confirmed that the call had indeed taken place. But there was one crucial detail the original team had completely missed. The call wasn't in the afternoon, as Robert had claimed. It happened much later, closer to the evening. Next, the detectives re-interviewed the witnesses who had supposedly seen Robert with his wife and children when they checked into the hotel. According to the case files, the family had arrived shortly after lunch, but the witnesses contradicted this, stating that the family actually checked in around 5:00 p.m. This timeline left Robert enough time to commit the murder. Finally, detectives tracked down April, Robert's ex-wife. She still maintained that Robert had nothing to do with the murder and stood by the alibi she had given decades earlier. Investigators pressed her multiple times, hoping she might reveal more, but she refused to change her story. With little else to go on, the cold case team continued re-examining evidence and following new leads, a process that stretched on for years. Then, in 2016, everything changed. Out of nowhere, April walked into the police station and said she wanted to talk. She explained that a series of personal hardships had made her rethink her silence about Joy's death. Then she dropped a bombshell. She had been lying about her ex-husband's alibi all along. According to April, on the day of the murder, Robert came home, covered in blood. When she asked what had happened, he told her coldly. He stabbed someone and set a house on fire. He then ordered her to pack up the kids, claiming they were going on a weekend trip. They drove to another city, but April realized the truth only a few days later. When detectives came to their door asking questions about Joy's death, she said Robert had brought a large bag with him on that trip. While walking in a park, he told her to wait with the kids, then disappeared into the woods for several minutes. When he came back, the bag was gone. When April confronted him later, begging him to tell the truth, Robert reacted violently. He beat her and threatened to frame her for the murder if she ever said a word. Terrified, she stayed silent for more than 2 decades. Now, after years of fear and guilt, April finally decided to come forward. Her statement completely changed the direction of the case, but detectives knew that testimony alone wouldn't be enough. They needed hard evidence, or ideally, a confession. To get that, they came up with a plan. They asked April to help them set up a controlled call with Robert. Police wired her house and staged a fake visit, pretending that officers had just come by to question her about Joy's murder. Right after they left, April called Robert, sounding anxious. She told him detectives had been asking about the case and that she didn't know what to say. Robert immediately told her to stay quiet, to refuse to talk, and not answer any questions. His tone and urgency made it clear he was worried about being exposed. There was nothing in his response that sounded like an innocent man's. Every word suggested guilt. With this recorded call as key evidence, detectives began preparing the case for trial. It took several more years to finalize, but in May 2022, Robert was finally arrested for the murder of Joy Hibbs. He continued to deny everything, but prosecutors were confident. After decades of silence, lies, and corruption, it seemed justice was finally within reach. This time, there would be no one left to protect him. The key witness in the case was April, and everything seemed to be moving steadily toward a conviction, until yet another shocking twist turned the trial on its head. When Robert's son was called to testify, no one expected what he would say next. Taking the stand, he revealed that his father had privately confessed to the murder. According to him, Robert called not long after speaking with April, sounding anxious and resigned. During that call, Robert told his son that the police were questioning April about the case and that he might be facing a life sentence. He said he wanted to prepare his son for what could happen, then began describing what he had done. This powerful testimony further solidified an already strong case against him. Yet one question remained. What was Robert's motive? Based on the evidence, it was clear that Robert had long been in conflict with Joy. He had a history of violent outbursts and a lengthy criminal record. Investigators also believed he had stolen the cash Joy withdrew from the bank just hours before her death. But soon, an even darker theory began to emerge. After renewed media coverage brought national attention to the case, detectives were contacted by some of Robert's relatives who lived out of state. They hadn't spoken to him in decades but were stunned when they saw Joy's photo on the news. They told police that as a teenager, Robert had attacked and brutally beaten his aunt, who bore a striking resemblance to Joy. This led detectives to suspect that Robert may have attacked Joy with the intention of assaulting her, although proving that is now no longer possible. Still, the pattern of violence painted a grim picture of who Robert truly was. In the end, the jury found Robert Atkins guilty of the first-degree murder of Joy Hibbs. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Joy's family, the verdict brought long-awaited justice, but also deep frustration. Robert had lived freely for over 30 years after the murder, all because police in 1991 had chosen to protect a banned substances informant rather than pursue justice for a murdered woman. In essence, Joy's life had been treated as less valuable than a narcotics case. Despite that painful truth, Joy's children expressed their gratitude to the new team of detectives who refused to give up. Herr's son, who had spent decades haunted by suspicions that his own father might have been involved. A belief planted by the original investigators, was finally able to learn the truth. Justice had come late, but at last, it had come.